Chapter 232. The next morning Rinpoche came to the Ministry of Works again and asked Tong Xingye, "Minister, how's the cement?" "Let's go and take a look together," Tong Xingye said. "I haven't had the time to see it either." They walked to the backyard but didn't see Feng Ho and Zhahongba. After all, they were officials with actual positions and had to deal with many things every day. They didn't have the time to keep an eye on a piece of cement and only needed to know the results. Tong Xingye was the Minister of Works, so he could see things further than others. Thus he paid more attention to the cement. When they arrived at the backyard, they saw a pile of cement that was mixed yesterday and a block that was used to cover the outside of 2 stones. Rinpoche stepped forward and touched it with his toes. It was very hard. "Is it done?" Rinpoche was delighted. He was most afraid that the ores in this world were different from those on Earth. After all, this was a different world and he didn't even know if they were in the same universe. Furthermore, this world had spirit swords and superior martial strength. It was normal to have some differences in the details. He tested the hardness of the cement with his foot and saw hope of success. He squatted down and pressed it with his finger. It was indeed hard like a stone. He then checked the cement that was used to cover the 2 stones. It was completely solidified and wrapped around the stones. He lifted it up and threw it to the ground with all his might. Even a corner of the stone slab was broken, and only a piece of cement was chipped. "It's done. There's no problem with the cement," Rinpoche said happily. Tong Xingye saw Rinpoche's actions and nodded his head slightly. He bent over and touched the cement block before slapping it with his palm. The pile of cement on the ground immediately broke into pieces, and a few pieces directly fell on Rinpoche's body. Rinpoche took a deep breath. He wasn't shocked but in pain. A piece of cement had directly hit his shin bone. "Ouch, ouch, ouch." Rinpoche hugged his calf and jumped non-stop. "It's slightly worse than the stones, but it's fine. Although a lot of materials are needed, it's much easier than quarrying, grinding and transporting them here." Tong Xingye nodded and turned to look at Rinpoche with a pained expression. He then turned his gaze away and pretended not to see it. He thought about it and felt that Rinpoche had a lot of good stuff. Perhaps there was something else that he wanted, so he apologized. "I'm sorry." After jumping for a long time, Rinpoche pulled up his trousers and saw that his calf was bruised and bleeding. After thinking about it, he realized that he couldn't argue with Tong Xingye over this matter. Since the Aboriginals were so careless, he could only blame himself for being unlucky. "Next, we'll store more of this cement and wait for 10 days to see how the red bricks turn out. If there are no problems, we'll build the brick kiln first. Once the furnace is ready, we can start with the production of cement and bricks. Once we can build the blast furnace." Moreover, this kind of blast furnace was also quite effective in smelting iron. It could even directly smelt steel, saving a lot of effort. In addition, cement had many other uses such as paving roads. There was no need for stone slabs and the cement could be directly laid on them. The same goes for repairing the city walls and other areas. Therefore, the more the better. "In the future, the consumption of this thing will definitely not be small," Rinpoche said to Tong Xingye while rubbing his leg. "I understand. I will write to Her Majesty today and ask her to assign manpower." Tong Xingye nodded. He didn't doubt Rinpoche's words. Even if Rinpoche didn't mention it, he would have thought of it in a few days. If this cement was used well, it was indeed a sharp weapon, especially for the Ministry of Works. Then he looked at Rinpoche and said, "The cement that Deputy Prefect Run brought out is very useful for Dayo and the Ministry of Works. In order to thank you, I will hold a banquet for you at House Yunyan tonight. Everyone from the Ministry of Works will be there. Deputy Prefect Ren, you must come." Rinpoche nodded his head cheerfully. This was the first time a big shot from the imperial court invited him to a banquet. He didn't know if it was a sign of acceptance. After all, he couldn't always rely on the Empress and wander around the palace every day. He hoped that this was a good start so that he could quickly integrate into Dayo's imperial court. After leaving the Ministry of Works, Rinpoche went straight to the Beast Park. Not long after he entered, he saw caretaker Sher playing with the stone dumbbell. The stone dumbbell, which weighed about 25 to 30 kilograms, was flying up and down in his hands. His whole body was drenched in sweat. Noticing Rinpoche's arrival, caretaker Sher's hands trembled and the stone dumbbell was smashed into the house. Deputy Prefect Ren. Caretaker Sher didn't even take a look at the loud bang and the dust that rose up from behind him. He gave off the feeling that a real man would never turn back to look at an explosion. Caretaker Sher. Rinpoche smiled. "I was still wondering when Deputy Prefect Ren would come. The shaved ice shops have earned a total of more than 400 taels of silver in the past 2 months. Also, the fans made by Deputy Prefect Ren have earned 200 taels of silver. I will just take a share of the shaved ice shop's profits. I should give Deputy Prefect Ren 450 taels of silver. It wasn't easy for me to see Deputy Prefect Ren these days. I was still thinking about how to give it to you. Caretaker sure beamed with joy when he mentioned this matter. The shaved ice shops had earned more than 400 taels of silver in the past 2 months. Caretaker sure also received more than 200 taels of silver. This year he would have an income of around 1,000 taels of silver. To him this was definitely a huge sum of money. Of course, what he didn't expect the most was that Ren Baqin had risen again and again within these few months. From a caretaker who was one rank lower than him, he directly rose to the position of secondary class, rank 5 Imperial Deputy Prefect. Even this position of Imperial Deputy Prefect was not taken seriously by anyone. The important thing was that he was chosen as the Empress's husband. Thinking about the changes in the past few months, Caretaker sure sighed. Recently, Ren Baqin didn't pay much attention to this aspect. After hearing Caretaker Sher's words, he then recalled the previous mess. Even though money didn't have much meaning to him now, he was still somewhat happy to receive more than 400 taels of silver. It was not bad to use it as a reward for others. Most importantly, this business belonged to him. It was completely different from what the Empress gave him. How's the shaved ice business recently? Ren Baqin smiled and asked. The shaved ice is still doing well, but we can't make that fan anymore. Now, a few shops are selling it, Caretaker Sher said with slight regret. It's all right, Ren Baqin replied indifferently. Originally, he wanted to say that he would sell good stuff to him in the future, but he swallowed the words when they were at the tip of his tongue. Based on Caretaker Sher's status, the current business was already his limit. If he increased his business any further, it would be hard to guarantee that someone would be jealous. At least on Earth it was like that. As for the future, it would depend on Caretaker Sher's luck. If he had the opportunity to give him a few pointers, he would definitely earn a lot from it. At the same time, his friendship with Ren Baqin was not in vain. When the time comes, I will get someone to collect it. This time, I am here to look for 2 people from Caretaker Sher, Ren Baqin said to Caretaker Sher. No problem, Caretaker Sher readily agreed. Get Ting Hulu and Tai Dao here, I will ask them if they are willing to work for me. How can they not be willing? These days they have been thinking about Sir Deputy Prefect. They are afraid that Deputy Prefect will forget about them. Caretaker Sher laughed heartily. After a while, Ting Hulu and Tai Dao were found. When they saw Ren Baqin, they greeted him happily. Are the 2 of you willing to work for me? Ren Baqin looked at them and asked. Of course we are willing. Our subordinates thank Sir Deputy Prefect for still remembering us. The 2 of them were overjoyed. Working for Ren Baqin was a good thing. Even in the past, the 2 of them would not have rejected him. Not to mention Ren Baqin's status had risen. The 2 of them were self-aware. Their strength was rather average. If not for the fact that they had submitted to Ren Baqin when he was still a caretaker, they would not have had the chance to do such a thing. That's good, this token is for the 2 of you. Look for me at the palace tomorrow morning. As for your accommodation, the 2 of you can rent a place in the city and get the money from Caretaker Sher, Ren Baqin said. He was the one who asked for this token from the Empress. After all, regardless of whether it was the farmland or some of his other ideas, he needed someone to do it. After meeting the few of them, Ren Baqin returned to the palace. He first inquired about the Empress's location and then went to the garden. After all, he still had to inform the Empress that he was going to attend the banquet at night. Actually, there were only a few places that the Empress usually stayed at. She would either stay at Yangxin Palace Hall or the garden. Occasionally, she would go to places like Qingxin Palace Hall and the Beast Park. To Ren Baqin it was very boring. Upon seeing the Empress, Ren Baqin greeted her and sat at one side with a face full of joy. Your Majesty, the cement is a success. It's a good thing, but now that you have no more rewards, I won't reward you. The Empress nodded her head and said. She had seen the tall buildings on Earth and knew more about the importance of cement than Tong Xinye. Ren Baqin laughed. To be able to stay by your Majesty's side is the greatest reward. After the Empress heard this, she raised her head slightly and squinted her eyes as she basked in the sunlight. She always liked to hear these words from him. The 2 of them just sat there and occasionally exchanged a few words. Most of the time they were silent. The main reason was that the Empress did not talk much and Ren Baqin could not say much even if he wanted to. However, the 2 of them were very relaxed and the atmosphere was very warm. Even Qing Yuan and Hong Luan stood a little further away to not disturb the 2 of them. After lunch, Ren Baqin told the Empress about Tong Xinye's invitation to attend the banquet. The Empress nodded her head and thought for a while before asking, What place is it? House Yunyan, Rinpoche replied. Well, I got it. The empress said, change your clothes in the evening and prepare to go. If you encounter anything interesting, tell me about it when you come back. Rinpoche then left for Qingxin Palace Hall. In the evening he changed his clothes and headed for House Yunyan. When he mentioned the location, the surrounding imperial guards had a strange expression on their faces. What? Is there something wrong with that place? Rinpoche asked doubtfully. Everyone's expression became even more strange. There was nothing wrong with that place. It was indeed a good place. The key was that the person who went there was not right. Sir, Great Xia calls that place a brothel, Su Wei, who was the leader of the guards assigned by the empress, couldn't help but say to Rinpoche. Chapter 233. Tong Xinye, that old bastard, actually dared to invite me to a brothel? Rinpoche was on the verge of kneeling. Rinpoche thought for a while. Did the empress know what that place was? She definitely didn't know. Who would tell her about a brothel for no reason? Should he go? Was there a need to ask this question? Of course he would go. He had never seen a brothel in this world. He heard that the women in ancient brothels were proficient in the 4 arts. He would go there to broaden his horizons. No matter how bold that old bastard was, he wouldn't arrange one for him, right? Rinpoche turned his head and looked puzzled. What's a brothel? The ignorant were innocent. Anyway, he didn't know what kind of place House Yunyan was. Your Majesty, if you want to blame someone, look for that old bastard. Let's go. We can't be late for the minister's banquet. Rinpoche called out to everyone and took the lead to rush forward. Everyone hurriedly followed and looked at Rinpoche with admiration. Why was he rushing to a brothel if he didn't know? Rinpoche didn't care what they thought. In any case, he had an excuse. Even though he knew that he couldn't do anything there, it was still a good thing to broaden his horizons and feast his eyes. However, he was so focused on broadening his horizons that he forgot a saying. Asking a gentleman how much worry he had was like a group of eunuchs visiting a brothel. Even though he wasn't a eunuch, he was probably worse off than a eunuch in a brothel. At least they could still move a little, but he didn't dare to. There was a street between Shihu District and Wadayagu District called Jing Street, but most people called it the 4 Great Courtyards Alley. There were very few people here during the day, but it was brightly lit at night. All kinds of mounts and carriages could be seen everywhere. In particular, people from other countries loved to come here when they had nothing to do, especially Great Xia's envoy, Gu Zicheng, who lingered here 20 out of 30 days a month. Jing Street was called the 4 Great Courtyards Alley mainly because the 4 courtyards here were Baihua Courtyard, Qinghua Courtyard, Duanyue Pavilion, and Jinyu Pavilion. These courtyards were filled with gentle women from Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Qin Nation. They were very different from Aboriginal women. In addition to merchants from other countries in Lan City, there were also many Aboriginal people who liked to hang out here. As for the Aboriginals, not only did they have a fiery temperament, but they also knew nothing about the 4 arts. No one came to a brothel to look for a tigress. Furthermore, many Aboriginal women were stronger than men. Although most of them were slightly weaker than men, they were still able to hunt in the mountains. Thus, not a single Aboriginal woman could be seen in such a place. House Yunyan was the most famous building in the 100-flower courtyard. Those who entered this building were all people of status. Without a certain level of status, this building would not accept people. Furthermore, most of the women there were proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Apart from Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Qin Nation, there were also gentle women from the Hao Nation. Ordinary people could not enter this building at all, so there were the most speculations about this building, and the reputation of this building spread far and wide. Under the guidance of the imperial bodyguards, Rinpoche rode the ox and arrived at the 4 great courtyards after the time it took for 2 incense sticks to burn. At this point in time, the sky was getting dark and the lights in the pavilions on both sides were lit up. There were also rows of lanterns hanging on the walls of the courtyards, and the scenery was excellent. There were already many people coming and going on the streets. Most of them were people from the other 3 nations with imperial bodyguards. These people were very low-key. There were also some descendants of the big shots of Dayo who were walking with crab steps. Their bodies were emitting a valiant aura, and they did not even look at the people from the other 3 nations. In fact, they even ran straight into them. If you did not avoid them, you would be out of luck. Rinpoche looked around and saw 2 familiar faces. He seemed to have seen them during the great hunt some time ago. When he saw the others, they naturally saw him as well. After all, there were so many imperial bodyguards in the surroundings, and they were all dressed like imperial bodyguards. Many of them were shocked when they first looked over and thought that it could be Her Majesty. They immediately became alert and craned their necks to take a look. When they saw Rinpoche, who was surrounded in the middle, they suddenly realized that it was actually this guy. Following which they widened their eyes. This guy actually dared to come to this place? Putting everything else aside, just this courage alone made many people give him a thumbs up. In a carriage that was moving slowly along the roadside, two men were sitting opposite each other. One was heroic and the other was elegant. These two men were Zhang Heqi and Zhang Heju from the Zhang family who followed their fifth uncle to Lan City. It's that guy. The two of them were surprised to see Rinpoche surrounded in the middle through the gap in the curtains. He actually dares to come to a brothel? Does Qi Zixiao know about it? Zhang Heqi looked incredulous. You three don't call him by his name here. Be careful not to be heard by others. Zhang Heju was also surprised, but he still warned them. There were many Dayo officials here and many of them were quite powerful. If someone heard them, the two of them would probably be in big trouble. Zhang Heqi shut his mouth and then said, Do you think the Empress of Dayo knows about it? So what if she knows or doesn't know? It has nothing to do with you and me. Zhang Heju looked at Rinpoche, who was surrounded by 10 imperial bodyguards, and said softly. At this moment, a guard who was close to the two of them seemed to have sensed Zhang Heju's gaze and turned his head to look. Zhang Heju immediately put down the curtains, afraid that they would be noticed. He is rising rapidly. We have been here for more than 2 months, but we have not made any progress at all, Zhang Heqi said with jealousy. If Rinpoche was an aboriginal, he wouldn't be jealous and would feel that it was only natural. However, he was also an outsider, but Qi Zixiao chose him as her husband. The two of them had not made any progress in Lan City for more than 2 months. In comparison, he was better than Rinpoche in terms of appearance and knowledge. Yet Qi Zixiao chose him. How could he not feel at ease? Not only him but Zhang Heju also felt the same way. However, Zhang Heju's thoughts were deeper and he didn't reveal a lot of things. I heard that a few days ago the Empress of Dayo specially went to the 9 pavilions because of him. Even Hua Sanlu was beaten to death and the entire 9 pavilions was destroyed. It was really terrifying. However, I can also see that the Empress of Dayo really values him and is even willing to take such a risk. Rinpoche stopped in front of a courtyard, turned his head to look around and asked, Here? Sir, it's here. Su Wei nodded. Rinpoche looked at the main door. There was no sign hanging on it, and there were 2 aboriginal burly men with sabers standing at the door. This didn't look like a brothel at all. Why did it look more like a prison? However, looking through the main door, there was a pavilion across the courtyard, and the sound of a woman's laughter could be heard from inside. However, there was a rockery in the courtyard that blocked most of the situation inside. One could hear the sound but not see anything. This made his heart itch. After getting off his mount, Rinpoche strode in with Su Wei and a few imperial bodyguards. Naturally, there would be someone to take care of the mount. Sir. The 2 aboriginal burly men at the door cupped their fists and greeted. Rinpoche guessed that this place was probably opened by a high-ranking official in the imperial court. Otherwise, the aboriginals wouldn't accept employment from foreigners, let alone work as a gatekeeper. Even though his guess wasn't right, it wasn't far off. Not only the Baihua courtyard but the other courtyards were also like this. Even though they weren't backed by a high-ranking official, they were backed by the 4 protectorates. Other than the Protectorate General, the 4 courtyards were backed by the North, Northeast, Southeast, and South Protectorates respectively. A portion of their income was used to purchase supplies from various countries to replenish the army. It wasn't because they were backed by the Protector Generals of the Protectorates, but because the 4 protectorates themselves were backed by the 4 courtyards. Therefore, for the past few decades, there had always been 4 courtyards in Lan City, and only 4 courtyards. Chapter 234. Rinpoche walked around the rockery and could finally see the pavilion in front of him. It was a 3-story wooden pavilion with a wooden veranda on the outside. The veranda was covered with green tiles. Every floor of the pavilion had overhanging eaves that were covered with greenish-gray tiles. It was completely different from the rough architectural style of Dayo. Instead, it looked somewhat delicate. The pavilion was not small, and it was directly opposite the rockery where the Tang dynasty was located. The sounds of women's laughter and men's laughter could be heard. Sir, you look unfamiliar. This must be your first time here. Sir, please come in. Would you like to sit in the main hall or in the wing room? She was about 27 or 28 years old. She wasn't tall, but her clothes bulged up a lot. She could be considered pretty and greeted Rinpoche with a polite tone. She sized him up with her eyes and smiled. Her smile was very clean and she didn't have any makeup on her face. She was completely different from the smooth and slick brothel keeper that Rinpoche had imagined. However, this made Rinpoche feel a lot more comfortable. If a familiar person were to stick close to him like in the movies, he really wouldn't know what to do. Rinpoche actually wanted to go to the main hall to take a look. His main purpose for coming here was to satisfy his curiosity. Otherwise, why would he take the risk of going back to kneel on a washboard? There would be plenty of opportunities to return to Earth. However, he still opened his mouth and asked, "Has Minister Tong of the Ministry of Works arrived?" So it's Minister Tong's guest. Minister Tong hasn't arrived yet, but quite a few people have arrived. Shall I bring them over now? Asked the woman. There's no hurry. Rinpoche waved his hand. Let's go to the lobby first. Sir Deputy Prefect. Upon hearing this, Su Wei hurriedly tried to dissuade him. It's nothing, I'm just taking a look. Rinpoche waved his hand and said, This building looks quite elegant. I wonder what it's like inside. Without waiting for Su Wei to stop him, he strode forward. This was his goal. How could he miss it? There was a circle of tables in the hall, separated by screens. In the middle, there was a 3-foot-tall stage that looked like a performance stage in a bar. The hall could not be considered luxurious, but it was very elegant. It could be seen that a lot of effort had been put into everything. Potted flowers and plants could be seen in every corner. Rinpoche walked into the lobby, scanned the structure of the building, and was slightly disappointed. There were quite a number of young and beautiful women shuttling back and forth. There were even a few women drinking wine with the men at the tables, and their laughter was like the tinkling of bells. These women were the same as the one behind Rinpoche. They wore light makeup and gave off a clean and pretty vibe. Their smiles were also very clean and not at all slutty. However, it seemed to be a little different from the brothel scenery he wanted to see. Rinpoche felt that it wasn't exciting enough. It was too formal and elegant. There wasn't even a seductive woman with half her breasts exposed. It wasn't seductive at all. After thinking about it carefully, Rinpoche felt that he might have thought too much. If they really wanted to do something, there were plenty of rooms upstairs. There seemed to be no need to rush it in the main hall. Forget it, let's go to House Yunyan. Rinpoche turned around and said to the lady behind him. Su Wei heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that he was really just glancing at him. Coming here with this person was truly frightening. If anything were to happen to him, he would be in deep trouble. Su Wei's mood worsened when he recalled that he had once heard that this person had seen a beachy. House Yunyan was located at the back of this pavilion and was next to a pool. A small stream flowed out of the pool and flowed around House Yunyan. Rinpoche was led to House Yunyan from the side of the courtyard and went straight up to the second floor. When he opened the door, he saw that there weren't many people inside. Feng Ho, Zhahongba, Gui Hong, and 3 other officials that he didn't know were sitting inside. Beside each of them sat an extremely beautiful and gentle lady who was chatting with them. Rinpoche's eyes lit up when he saw this scene. Greetings to all of you. I'm not late, am I? Rinpoche smiled and cupped his hands. Deputy Prefect Ren. How can you say that you're not late? Bring me 3 jars first. Zhahongba laughed and said. The others nodded their heads in succession. Rinpoche almost stumbled. He was just being courteous, yet they took it seriously. Furthermore, all of you drink according to the jar? If I drink it, I will be a fool today. Xiaoqingzhi, you must be joking. In my current condition, I can't even drink 3 cups, let alone 3 jars. Rinpoche glared at Zhahongba. Everyone smiled insincerely. Their gazes were strange and it made Rinpoche's hair stand on end. Deputy Prefect Rin, please sit here. Gui Hong called out to Rinpoche. The seat was just beside him. There was still an empty seat which presumably belonged to Tong Jinya. If it was according to the official position, it would never be his turn to sit in that seat. But in reality, everyone really couldn't put him down. After all, this banquet was held because of Rinpoche's cement and sweet potatoes. Furthermore, Rinpoche had another identity. When he sat down, Rinpoche also knew the identity of the other 3 people. One was the Xiaoqing of the Department of Ordnance, the other was Tong Yen of the Department of Works, and the last one was the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works, Feng Lai. Among them, the craftsman supervisor was mainly in charge of repairing houses, making official uniforms, registering craftsmen, etc. Deputy Prefect Ren, I still have to thank Deputy Prefect Ren for making the cement. In the future, it will save me a lot of effort when I build and repair houses. Tong Yen cupped his hands and said after Rinpoche sat down. It's all for Her Majesty. Rinpoche quickly returned the gesture. Following which, everyone casually chatted for a while. From time to time, they would tease the beautiful ladies around them. Everyone at the table had a young, beautiful, gentle, and pleasant girl beside them. If a photo of them was posted on Earth, many people would lick the screen. Only Rinpoche was alone. This made him widen his eyes as he realized a problem. Could it be that he had been cheated? This bunch of old men actually invited him to a brothel. Then each of them hugged a lady while he stared at them? This development didn't seem right. In any case, they should have at least given him a lady to talk to. Just as Rinpoche was wringing his head and wondering if this bunch of people did it on purpose or if they were picking ladies for him, heavy footsteps could be heard outside the door. Everyone stopped. Tong Jingye pushed open the door and said, "I'm late." "Sir Tong, you are the latest here. You have to drink 3 jars of wine as punishment." Gui Hong loudly repeated Zhahongba's words. Even though Tong Jingye was his immediate superior, he didn't show any mercy when it was time to run on him. Well said, well said. Tong Jingye laughed heartily and said, "Why did Sir Rin do it yourself?" He turned his head and shouted loudly, "Bring Qin Yu and Ling Guan here." Following which, he strode into the room and sat beside Rinpoche. He slapped Rinpoche's shoulder and almost pushed him off the table. "I'm late. I'll drink first as a sign of respect." "Sir Rin is also late," Zhahongba added faintly. Rinpoche glanced sideways at Zhahongba. "Why are you staring at me? What kind of hatred and resentment do you have?" Tong Jingye laughed heartily and said, "Hurry up and serve the wine." Not long after he finished speaking, someone brought the wine in. Everyone had a small jar in front of them that seemed to contain at least half a kilogram. After filling up the jar in front of everyone, they continued to bring it into the room. At least 20 of these small jars were placed at one side of the room before they retreated. Tong Jingye smashed the seal and passed it to Rinpoche. He took another jar and gestured to everyone, "Give me 3 jars first." Then he raised his head and gulped it down. Rinpoche saw that everyone was looking at him and gritted his teeth. "Damn it, let's just drink. I can't pretend to be a coward before it even starts." He raised his head and took a big gulp. Then he imitated Tong Jingye and spilled half of it. The alcohol content of this wine wasn't too high. At most, it was more than 10%. This made him feel more at ease. After downing 3 jars, Rinpoche's face turned red. Even though the alcohol content was more than 10%, he still drank half of it and almost vomited. At this moment, the door was pushed open again. 2 ladies who were even more beautiful than the lady sitting beside the others walked in. They first bowed to everyone and smiled faintly before coming to Tong Jingye and Rinpoche's side. Tong Jingye pulled one of the ladies into his arms and pushed the other to Rinpoche's side. Rinpoche was immediately shocked. Even though the others were accompanied by beautiful ladies, which made him very jealous, this old man Tong Jingye actually pushed a lady to him? Tong Jingye looked at Rinpoche's shocked expression and immediately laughed heartily. "As men, as long as you don't say anything, no one will know. If Her Majesty really finds out and blames you, I will bear the consequences." Chapter 236. The Empress was bored to death as she sat in the palace. She fiddled with the walkie-talkie in her hand and didn't press the call button for a long time. She was especially bored today. However, she didn't think much of it when Rinpoche went out to drink. After all, this was the norm. Although she had never come into contact with these things, she would occasionally hear some interesting things happening outside the palace. They were all things that Hong Yuan and Qin Yuan had heard from other places and told to her to amuse her. And she was willing to drink. "I wonder what that House Yunyan is like. I'll go and have a look when I have the chance." The Empress was slightly lost in thought. Apart from the palace, she had never been to any other restaurants in Lan City. Presumably, drinking in a restaurant was more interesting than drinking in the palace. However, the Empress felt that she had heard of House Yunyan before. "Qin Yuan, have you heard of House Yunyan?" the Empress asked casually. Qin Yuan loved to find out about those gossips and would talk about them after returning to the palace. House of Yunyan? Qin Yuan was a little puzzled as to why His Majesty would ask about this, but she still thought hard about it. After a long time, she became spirited and said, "I remember now. Last time, the Minister of Works, Lord Tong, and the Minister of War, Lord Qin, fought in that House of Yunyan. Later, people said that it was a battle at the top of a brothel. You seem to have mentioned this before." The Empress nodded her head. She seemed to have recalled such a matter. "Why is it called the decisive battle at the summit of the brothel?" the Empress asked curiously. "They say that House Yunyan is a brothel. It seems that many adults go there." "I've heard about it a few times," Qin Yuan said. "Why is it called a brothel?" the Empress asked. "Maybe it's green?" Qin Yuan's eyes widened as she guessed. She had previously asked why it was called a brothel, but no one seemed to have told her. "Your Majesty, why did you think of this?" Qin Yuan felt that Her Majesty was a little strange tonight. Why did she suddenly think of this matter? In the past, when she told her about it, she was never interested. Oh. The Empress muttered to herself for a while and didn't say anything. However, he felt even more bored. Call Xangia over, the Empress ordered. A moment later, Xangia entered the palace. Your Majesty. The Empress stood up and walked out. Follow me out of the palace. There's no need to inform the others, we're just going out for a stroll. Yes. Xangia hurriedly followed him. It was rare for Her Majesty to be in such a mood, so she naturally wouldn't stop him. No one could hurt His Majesty anyway. In the past few years, the number of times His Majesty left the palace could be counted on one hand. This was the first time he wanted to go out at night. Qing Yuan pouted at the back. How could His Majesty not bring her along? It had been a long time since he had left the palace. After leaving Yangxin Palace Hall, the Empress appeared on the roof in a flash. After a few transformations, she appeared outside the palace. Since they were out for a stroll, there was no need to walk through the palace gates. As for the other mounts, they weren't even as fast as her walking. Your Majesty, where are we going? Xangia landed behind the Empress and asked. House Yunyan. Do you know the way? The Empress asked casually. She wanted to try out what it felt like to drink in a restaurant. Since so many officials of the imperial court liked to go to House Yunyan, it must be a good place. She could also listen to what they were saying. Xangia was terrified after hearing what the Empress said. Your Majesty. We can't do it here. Qing Yuan and Hong Luan did not know what kind of place that was, but with so many subordinates under her, how could they not know about House Yunyan? Even if no one mentioned it in front of her, she would occasionally hear about it. When the Empress saw Rinpoche's reaction, she turned to look at her and asked, Why? Is there anything I don't know? Your Majesty, House Yunyan is a place for men to seek pleasure. With your status, the consequences will be unimaginable if you go there. Furthermore, you will be disgraced. Seek pleasure? Not a restaurant? The Empress finally understood what was going on. Your Majesty. Xangia did not know whether to laugh or cry. Which bastard told the Empress about that place? That's a place where women accompany men to drink and seek pleasure. It's really not suitable for your Majesty to go there. Why don't I accompany you somewhere else? If your Majesty wants to go to a restaurant, I know 2 good places to go, Xangia consoled. The Empress was silent for a while before she chuckled. Xangia felt the temperature around the Empress drop sharply. Even she could feel the chill. Hee, all the more reason to go and take a look. The Empress sneered. Your Majesty. Xangia was shocked. If people knew that the Empress wanted to go there, the consequences would be unimaginable. Lead the way. The Empress said coldly. With the sweet potatoes made by Sir Ren, life in the mountain village will be much better in a few years. I thank you on behalf of everyone in the village. Sir Ren, why don't you consider going to the Department of Agriculture and Livestock? Guihong held a small jar and knocked it against Rinpoche's bowl. Then he raised his head and gulped down the wine. No, I'm not going. Rinpoche rejected him flatly. Then he gulped down another mouthful of wine. His eyes were already blurred. He had already drunk a lot of wine before Guihong. Even though the alcohol content wasn't high, he couldn't handle drinking like this. Just now, Tong Jingye pushed a gentle woman to him, and he immediately pushed her away. If that old man set him up, wouldn't he die a miserable death? Sir Tong, enjoy it yourself. I'm not interested in women. I'm just here to drink. Rinpoche grinned, revealing his white teeth. Tong Jingye spat out the wine. He looked at Rinpoche and laughed. All right. However, when that delicate and charming woman called Ling Guan poured wine for Rinpoche, Rinpoche deliberately moved his stool a little further away, maintaining a distance of half a meter. It looked like Tong Jingye was hugging a woman in each hand. That woman called Ling Guan didn't mind Rinpoche's actions at all. She pursed her lips and smiled as she poured wine for him. She considerately helped Rinpoche fill up his wine cup. Every time she would specially get up to pour wine for him. Rinpoche always felt that this woman was definitely in cahoots with them. Tell me, what benefits did Sir Tong promise you to get me drunk with them? Rinpoche looked at her dizzily after drinking a few jars of wine. Sir, you must be joking. The wine was offered by all of you and you drank it yourself. I'm just refilling your wine with my bare hands. Don't tell me that you don't like it? Ling Guan smiled. When Rinpoche heard Ling Guan's words, such a person suddenly appeared in his mind. If that person could be like this. Rinpoche's heart quivered when he thought of the Empress refilling his wine with a gentle voice. That would most likely be the last wine. However, even though the Empress was cold, she was extremely charming when she was cold. Occasionally she would reveal her feminine side. That kind of contrast was very alluring. However, it was extremely rare. After such a long time he had only seen it a few times. When he thought of the Empress, Rinpoche's thoughts magnified under the influence of alcohol and he started to miss her very much. After all, even though he was always on tenterhooks in the beginning, after such a long time, the Empress's weight in his heart was extremely heavy and occupied more than half of it. At first, when he heard about the brothel he was full of curiosity but he was just fooling around. When he really sat here he was thinking about the Empress. After drinking another 2 bowls of wine, Tang Xinye looked at his drowsy appearance and asked, "Deputy Prefect Ren, why don't you come to the Ministry of Works? We are still lacking an assistant minister." Tang Xinye's and Gui Hong's methods were exactly the same. Feng Lai looked at him with a hidden bitterness. "I'm not going." Ren Baqin flatly refused. "If you come to the Ministry of Works, with your knowledge and experience, you will definitely be able to do something and change the opinion of the entire imperial court. Why do you need to do those miscellaneous things in Yufu? It's really a waste." Tang Xinye looked drunk but still tried his best to persuade Ren Baqin patiently. There were several reasons why he invited Ren Baqin to drink this time around. The so-called celebration was only a side effect. He wanted to see Ren Baqin's temperament, and he also wanted to pull Ren Baqin into the Ministry of Works. Tang Xinye's real intention was to pull Ren Baqin into the Ministry of Works. Even though Ren Baqin held a post in Yufu, as long as he talked to the Empress, there shouldn't be a problem for him to come to the Ministry of Works. He always felt that Ren Baqin had a lot of knowledge in his head and would be of great use to the Ministry of Works. Of course he also had some other ideas. For example, he wanted to get something out of Ren Baqin's mouth to see how much knowledge he had. However, after 3 rounds of wine, Tang Xinye had long forgotten about this matter and only remembered to pull Ren Baqin into the Ministry of Works. Even so, "I'm not going," Ren Baqin said in a drowsy manner. He couldn't hear what Tang Xinye was saying after that. His mind was spinning and his head fell on the table. Tang Xinye rambled on for a long time, but he still couldn't hear any movement from Ren Baqin. He only heard Feng Ho say in a drunken tone, "Deputy Prefect Ren has collapsed just like that. You didn't play tricks while drinking, not bad." Tang Xinye looked at Ren Baqin and burped. "Why have you collapsed? I haven't finished talking yet. If Deputy Prefect Ren goes back like this, I'm afraid Her Majesty will blame you." Tang Yen, who was relatively sober, said. Following which, he added, "In any case, Minister Ren, you are the one who will bear the responsibility. What's there to be afraid of?" Tang Xinye didn't seem to care at all. At worst, he could just say that he was helping Her Majesty to test Deputy Prefect Ren's temperament. Would Her Majesty still blame him? "Is that so?" A cold voice suddenly came from the window. 2 figures immediately entered the room. With a sweep of her eyes, the Empress could clearly see the situation in the room. Each of them had a lady by their side, and there were 2 ladies by Tang Xinye's side. Ren Baqin, on the other hand, was well behaved and kept his distance from the rest. His head had fallen on the table. She was slightly satisfied with the situation in the room. "Your Majesty." Before Tang Xinye could finish his sentence, he broke through 3 walls in a row and flew out. The deafening sound alarmed everyone in the brothel. The Empress grabbed Ren Baqin's collar with one hand and disappeared out of the window in a flash. Before Xinjia left, she glared at everyone fiercely. This bunch of B***stards actually brought that person to the brothel? Were they courting death? Tang Yen looked at the big hole in the wall and the few ladies who were shocked. He calmly drank his wine and said, "In any case, Minister Ren will bear the responsibility." Everyone was shocked when the Empress came in just now. After the Empress left, everyone looked at the wall and heard Tang Yan's words. Immediately, everyone burst into laughter. None of them could sit still. Gui Hong laughed so hard that he slammed his palm on the table, causing a huge piece of the stone table to fall off. Chapter 237. When Ren Baqin was blown by the night wind, he felt his stomach churn and vomit the moment he opened his mouth. Being carried by the Empress, he vomited along the way as if she was sowing seeds. The Empress looked at Ren Baqin, who she was carrying, with a look of disgust on her face. Even though the smell had been left behind along the way, it still made its way into her nose. "Your Majesty, why don't I carry Deputy Prefect Ren?" Xinjia said from behind. The Empress was carrying Deputy Prefect Ren from the front, and the smell of the Empress's clothes was going straight into her nose. Moreover, he had to be careful to avoid the unknown things that were coming towards him. The Empress looked at Ren Baqin, threw him to Xinjia, and landed on the street from the rooftop. With her hands behind her back, she walked forward unhurriedly. Lan City was very dark at night. Other than the lantern-carrying pedestrians and the light from the courtyards, there was only the light from the two moons. Xinjia imitated the empress and held onto his back, making him lean forward. In their hands, Renbaqian's weight was no different from that of a straw. Zixiao. Renbaqian mumbled vaguely. The empress stopped in her tracks and turned around. Renbaqian's eyes were tightly shut, and he didn't seem to be sober at all. He was still mumbling, Zixiao. Zixiao? Xinjia was shocked. Renbaqian actually called Her Majesty by her name. His Majesty didn't seem angry at all. Instead, his expression was relaxed and calm, not cold. Zixiao, pour the wine, the empress, Xinjia. Xinjia was shocked by Renbaqian's courage. The empress furrowed her eyebrows and ignored him. She turned around and walked toward the palace. After returning to the center of the palace, she threw Renbaqian back to Pingle Park. The empress took the wine pot and went up to the roof of Yangxin Palace Hall. She looked up at the moonlight and drank a mouthful of wine from time to time. Originally he was prepared to beat Renbaqian half to death and cripple Tong Xingye. However, when she saw that he kept his distance from the others and behaved himself, her anger disappeared without a trace, and her mood changed from bad to good. If Tong Xingye hadn't spouted nonsense, he might not have been beaten. What happened just now? In a room sat a man with one arm missing. His surname was Xing and his name was Xing Rong. He used to be a commandant of the Protectorate of the North, and now he was the person in charge of the 100 Flowers courtyard. The Minister of Works, Lord Tong, is hosting a banquet at House Yunyan. Below him were 10 equally muscular men, but they were missing an eye, an ear, and only 2 fingers on their left hands. Xing Rong didn't say anything. His life of blood and fire gave people the feeling that he was like steel that had been tempered 100 times. He was silent, hard, and contained a powerful explosive force. Even though he was now a cripple, not many people would look down on him. Imperial Deputy Prefect Renbaqian has also been invited by Sir Tong, that man continued. Xing Rong thought for a while before he remembered who Imperial Deputy Prefect Renbaqian was. In fact, no one really took Renbaqian's position as Imperial Deputy Prefect seriously. Usually when people mentioned him they would refer to him as, that guy. When Xing Rong recalled who Renbaqian was he laughed. And then? His Majesty is here, the man said concisely. Lord Tong suffered a kick and smashed through 3 walls before falling into the Moon Pavilion. On the other hand, Deputy Prefect Ren was fine and was brought back. I wonder if anything will happen when I get back. Upon hearing this, Xing Rong burst into laughter. He laughed so hard that tears were about to come out of his eyes. After a while he stopped and asked, "How is Renbaqian?" "I couldn't tell. He looks quite well behaved. If he doesn't follow the rules, Your Majesty doesn't have to do anything. I will kill him with a slap," Xing Rong said casually. The Empress's prestige in Dayo was extremely high. The same went for Hong Wu in the Protectorate of the North and the people of Dayo. As Hong Wu's subordinate, he naturally revered the Empress. "Tell everyone who knows about this to shut up." Xing Rong waved his hand. Whether it was him or the people of the Ministry of Works, they all kept their mouths shut about this matter. However, the matter still spread, especially among the upper echelons of the court. Tong Xingye invited Imperial Deputy Prefect Renbaqian to drink wine at House Yunyan, but the Empress kicked him from House Yunyan to the Moon Pavilion. This was considered the most eye-catching case of an adulterer being caught in a brothel in Lan City, even though only a few people knew about it. Many people rejoiced in Tong Xingye's misfortune and were waiting to see how Tong Xingye would look the next day. For example, the Minister of War, Qin Chuan, was very happy to mock Tong Xingye. At the same time, he wanted to see if that Imperial Deputy Prefect had been beaten to death by His Majesty. Renbaqian slept all the way until dawn. When he woke up, he had a terrible headache and his stomach was churning again. Just as he was about to vomit, he realized that there was a small basin in front of him. Immediately he vomited for a long time. Then he took a bowl of sweetened water and drank it. Before he could feel better, his stomach churned again and he vomited out all the sweetened water that he had just drunk. After tossing and turning for a long time and vomiting whatever he drank, he finally fell into a deep sleep. When he woke up again it was already noon. Not far away, a palace maid was dozing off. When she heard the sound of Renbaqian getting up, she quickly helped him up and poured him a cup of sweetened water. After Renbaqian drank the sweetened water, he felt slightly better and finally survived. He swore ferociously in his heart, "Damn it, I won't drink so much next time no matter what. It's really unbearable." If I drink so much again, I will change my surname to Qi. He got up from his bed and went out to get some fresh air. As for what happened last night, he didn't know anything at all. He thought that Su Wei and the others sent him back. That palace maid left in a hurry. Not long after, she brought a bowl of porridge over and Ren Baqin drank it clean. Sir, someone is looking for you. He has been waiting since morning. When the Imperial Guards of Pingle Park saw that Ren Baqin had woken up, they had a strange expression on their faces. Others might not know about what happened last night, but they were very clear about it. No one would have thought that the Minister of Works, Sir Tong, would be sent flying with a kick from Her Majesty. Yet this Deputy Prefect Ren was actually unscathed. If Tong Xinye knew about this, there was an 80% chance that he would be resentful and say, "Your Majesty, you have changed. In the past, we would both be punished 50 times. After hearing this, Ren Baqin recalled that he had asked Teng Hulu and Tai Dao to look for him yesterday. He instructed the Imperial Guards to bring the two of them into the palace while he sat on a stone bench in the courtyard. He covered his head with one hand and posed like a thinker. Only when he heard footsteps coming from the courtyard did Ren Baqin turn his head to take a look. To his surprise, it wasn't the two of them. It was the Empress, who was wearing a red muslin dress with a white undergarment inside. "Your Majesty." Ren Baqin quickly got up and greeted her. The Empress looked at him and said coldly, "I heard that you went to drink wine with prostitutes yesterday? Tell me, how do you drink wine with prostitutes? I have never tried it before." "Your Majesty, how would I know what kind of place that is? It was the Minister of Works, Tong Xinye, who invited me there. Before I went there yesterday, I even mentioned it to Your Majesty. I only found out what kind of place it was after I went there. I didn't expect Sir Tong, who looks so mature, to actually be so dissolute." Ren Baqin hurriedly cried injustice. Furthermore, he continued to smear Tong Xinye's name without the slightest hesitation. "I heard that you even called my name," the Empress said again. "I must have missed Your Majesty too much. There is a saying that a day apart feels like 3 years. The saying is indeed true. You still want me to pour you wine?" Chapter 238. In Yangxin Palace Hall, Ren Baqin and the Empress sat face to face. Between them was a table with a few dishes on it. "Drink with me. I'm going to pour it for you." After the Empress poured some wine for him, her eyes slightly curved, and the corners of her mouth curled up. Ren Baqin felt nauseous when he smelled the pungent smell of alcohol. This time it wasn't wine with more than 10% alcohol. Instead, it was erguatu that Ren Baqin brought over. "Your Majesty, I don't know anything." Ren Baqin scowled miserably. When did he ask the Empress to pour wine for him? Was that something he could say? Furthermore, how did the Empress hear about it? Could it be that you don't want to drink with me? The Empress's gaze was like the ripples on the surface of a calm lake that was being blown by the wind. Her tone was gentle, and there was even a long syllable at the end. If it was any other time, the Empress's attitude and tone would have made his heart itch. At this moment, it was as if he had eaten a yellow lotus. No matter how hard he racked his brain, he couldn't figure out what he had done wrong. The Empress held the wine glass with 3 fingers and looked at Ren Baqin's face. She found the bitter look on his face interesting, and the smile on her face became even more obvious. Ren Baqin clenched his teeth, raised his wine glass to indicate to the Empress, and downed it in one gulp. His stomach churned again, and it took him a lot of effort to suppress it. The Empress also poured the wine in her cup into her mouth with a smile. Then she poured another cup for Ren Baqin. Ren Baqin looked at the wine glass and thought about the wine that the Empress poured for him yesterday. He thought that it would definitely be the last wine he would get. He didn't expect to drink it today. After downing 3 cups in a row, Ren Baqin immediately covered his mouth for fear that he would spit it out. The Empress then said, "Forget it, I won't torture you anymore." Ren Baqin felt as if he had been pardoned. "Give Deputy Prefect Ren a bowl of green vine water." The Empress raised her head and said. Her voice traveled directly to the ears of Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, who were standing at the entrance of Yangxin Palace Hall. A moment later, a bowl of green and transparent soup with a strange smell was placed in front of him. "Drink it, it will help you get over the hangover," the Empress said. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Ren Baqin drank the green vine water. It tasted very strange, as if there were many different things mixed in it. However, after drinking it, his body immediately warmed up, and the uncomfortable feeling lessened a lot. "I'm saved," Ren Baqin moaned. The Empress pursed her lips slightly, and there was a tinge of pride in her eyes. This was the first time the Empress had displayed such a childish expression on her face. "Your Majesty, what is this?" Ren Baqin asked curiously. This kind of hangover medicine would definitely sell well. He had drunk those anti-hangover drugs before, but the effects were very ordinary, especially after drinking. Compared to the green vine water, it was like heaven and earth. It's a type of green vine from the 60,000 mountains. You can use it after grinding it into powder and mixing it with water. However, ordinary people can't get drunk even if they want to. Naturally, no one uses this thing, the Empress said casually. Rinpoche immediately memorized this. As long as this thing was brought to Earth, it would probably be launched into the market very quickly. After all, the two drugs were still in development, and it would probably take a few years before they could produce results. Although he still had 20 million on him, which seemed like a lot, it wasn't really enough to do anything. He was also too embarrassed to go to the Empress's treasury to take things back to Earth to sell. Rinpoche stayed in Yangshin Palace Hall for a long time. After chatting with the Empress for a while, he got up and left. Although he was teased, he discovered something good. Rinpoche felt that the laboratory on Earth would soon be able to launch a product that could be launched into the market. After returning to his room, Rinpoche thought about whether he had forgotten anything. In the afternoon he met Teng Hulu and Tai Dao. When they saw the Empress, they didn't even dare to raise their heads. The Empress glanced at the two of them, didn't say anything, and left on her own. Before she left, she asked Rinpoche to come to Yangshin Palace Hall after he was done with his work. It was as if she came to see if Rinpoche had woken up. After that, Rinpoche explained some things to the two of them. In addition to the farmland, he also drew a rough outline of the sofa and asked them to find a carpenter to make it. He also asked a blacksmith to make things like springs. After which, he just needed to lay a cushion and cover it with processed leather. After thinking for a while, it seemed that he had forgotten nothing and disappeared from the room. Rinpoche appeared in the living room on Earth and realized that it was night time. Other than the light coming in from the window, it was pitch black. Just as he was about to sit on the sofa, Rinpoche's ears twitched slightly. There were sounds upstairs. Furthermore, it was the sound of someone walking and rummaging through things. Someone was there. A thief? Rinpoche immediately realized that his house had been invaded by a thief. He didn't know if it was the thief or him who was unlucky. He wasn't around most of the time, but he actually bumped into the thief the moment he came back. He always came back with the Empress, but when he came back alone he bumped into the thief. Rinpoche felt that both he and the thief were rather unlucky. What should he do? Call the police? He was afraid that the thief would notice if he made any noise now. Should he make some noise to scare the thief away? Rinpoche pondered that the important things upstairs wouldn't be taken away by the thief. For example, the contract he signed with Papa Chen would be useless even if it was taken away. But where would he put his face? In any case, he was a man who faced tens of thousands of soldiers and survived through a sea of blood. He had stayed in a world of martial arts for so long and had seen so many experts. How could he be afraid of a thief? Furthermore, his hands had the strength of 170 kilograms. Wasn't he more powerful than an average adult? Rinpoche made up his mind. He tiptoed to the kitchen and took a kitchen knife. Even though he might not need it, if the thief had a knife, he could rely on it to defend himself. Then he quietly made his way to the second floor. It was also pitch black, but there was some light in his room, similar to a flashlight. Rinpoche felt his way to the door of his room. His heart skipped a beat. Damn, there were two people. Ghost. The person in the room accidentally shone his flashlight at the door and saw a figure. He was scared out of his wits. Ghost my ass, the other person cursed and shone his flashlight at the door. At this moment, Rinpoche didn't have time to hide. He stood at the door with a gloomy look on his face and got a shock. Damn it, if I knew it was two people, I wouldn't have flaunted myself. Feels like a tragedy. Rinpoche cursed in his heart. How was he going to clean up this mess? What are you looking for? Rinpoche said in a low voice and put on a gloomy look. The man in the room was shocked at first, then he became furious. He took out a knife from his waist and cursed, Motherf asterisk cur, don't play tricks on me. Brothers, we are in the same line. I didn't expect you to be one step ahead of me. Rinpoche laughed awkwardly. Hearing Rinpoche's words, the man became even more furious. Get lost or I will stab you to death. Chapter 239. At this time there was a white cloth on the bed. There were some things piled up on it, but it was hard to see what was inside. Rinpoche thought about it and realized that there was nothing worth stealing from him. There was probably more than 1,000 yuan in his wallet. It didn't matter if he let them take it. As for those cards, they shouldn't be able to guess the password. He could just get another one tomorrow. At this moment he suddenly remembered something. There seemed to be a few jade pendants. Although they were not worth much, they were worth 2 million yuan in total. However, he did not sell them because they were not enough. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter if the jade pendant worth 2 million yuan was gone. Moreover, if the jade pendant worth 2 million yuan was lost, the police should be able to catch the culprit. Rinpoche remembered that there were some photos of the empress in the phone. He had to get the phone back. Rinpoche thought about it and felt that such a small request shouldn't be too difficult, right? They couldn't sell the phones for much money. The man thought for a moment. What if this person really went out and called the police? He could not help but ask, "What do you want?" "We'll split it in half when we meet," Rinpoche said. Of course he couldn't just ask for the phone. It would be too obvious. The two looked at each other and nodded. All right. Rinpoche reached out to turn on the lights and the two of them immediately shouted, "Don't turn on the lights." "It's fine. I've been watching this place for a long time, and there are very few people here," Rinpoche replied nonchalantly. Of course, the two people that Rinpoche mentioned knew about this. Otherwise they wouldn't have appeared here. "The items are here. We'll take these items. You can choose the rest." One of them directly grabbed a few pieces of jade pendants. Although the two of them did not know much about these things, they were often very valuable. Rinpoche scanned through the contents and knew that they were all things that weren't very important to him. Contracts and whatnot were tossed aside by them. "Generally there isn't much cash in a wallet, but I still choose a wallet." Rinpoche stood at the door and didn't move. The two people inside were holding knives in their hands. Getting his wallet would save him the trouble of getting a new card and ID. The burly man threw the wallet at Rinpoche's feet. "Those are jade pendants, right? Should be something good. Since that's the case, I'll earn some money." "I want the phone too," Rinpoche continued. The phone slid across the floor to his feet. Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. Everything else didn't matter. He's the landlord. His photo is on the table. Just as Rinpoche was about to relax, another person in the room suddenly shouted in surprise. Rinpoche cursed in his heart. Suddenly he recalled that he did have a photo with the empress. It was taken in Turkey and he had developed it and placed it on the table. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have turned on the lights. Hearing this, the big man's eyes flashed fiercely. "Brat, you're courting death. You're just stealing. You don't want to become murderers, right? If you're caught stealing, you'll be sentenced to 2 or 3 years at most, but murder is the death penalty," Rinpoche calmly explained. When the two of them heard this, they were stunned. Their footsteps, which were about to rush over, also stopped. This was the first time they had encountered something like this. This guy was too calm. If it wasn't for the fact that this guy was holding a kitchen knife in his hand, he would have thought that he had met a tough opponent. However, Rinpoche's calmness and words were still the same. The two of them secretly praised him for being a character. At first, he pretended to be in the same trade, but now he could say such words. Rinpoche's calmness was infectious. "You're right." The burly man nodded. "We're after money, not our lives." "That's right. My wallet and phone are of some use to me. The rest doesn't matter." Rinpoche smiled. "You look like a character. This time we've offended you. We won't take anything else and we'll leave now," the burly man said again. Rinpoche paid attention to the two of them as he bent over to pick up the phone. At the same time he said, "Since this is the case, I won't call the police." At this moment, the burly man's eyes suddenly flashed fiercely. He rushed toward Rinpoche with the dagger in his hand. F***ck. Rinpoche was shocked by this sudden turn of events. Didn't they already have a deal? However, his movements weren't slow. He quickly dodged to the side. After going through so many things, even though he was still a weak chicken and hadn't improved much in this aspect, he wouldn't panic when he encountered danger. Instead, he calmly dodged the other party's dagger. Why? Rinpoche was puzzled. Why did the other party change his mind again? A dead man won't call the police. The burly man gritted his teeth and slashed the dagger in his hand toward Rinpoche again. Rinpoche's head was filled with question marks. No matter what, it wasn't worthwhile to kill someone, right? There shouldn't be any problem with his words unless the other party wanted to kill him from the start. Otherwise it wouldn't make sense. However, he couldn't figure out what exactly was going on. However, he didn't have time to think. He narrowly dodged the dagger and slashed at the other party's hand with the back of his hand. Rinpoche's ferocious nature was aroused. After all, he had killed people before. At this moment he couldn't be like a lamb. Rinpoche's kitchen knife happened to slash at the other party. It was fast and ruthless. The burly man couldn't stop in time and was directly chopped off by Rinpoche. He immediately cried out in pain and covered his arm. Fuzi. The other person rushed out of the room and was shocked to see this scene. He took out a dagger and stabbed at Rinpochen. Rinpochen barely dodged, but his ribs were cut. The pain was transmitted directly to his brain, causing him to groan. That person stabbed at Rinpochen's neck again. At the same time, the burly man called Fuzi endured the pain and used his left hand to pick up the dagger. When Rinpochen saw that he was about to be attacked by two people, he quickly shouted, "Help!" and turned to run. When the other party heard Rinpochen's shout, he became anxious and chased Rinpochen downstairs with his knife. It was pitch black downstairs. His eyes couldn't adapt to the darkness and he almost couldn't see anything. At this moment, Rinpochen suddenly stopped in his tracks and swung his kitchen knife at the man's neck. Blood immediately spurted out like a fountain. That person went limp without making a sound. Rinpochen's palms were also sweating. It wasn't because he had killed someone but because it was too scary to fight with a real knife and gun. His heart was about to jump out of his chest. At this moment, Fuzi, who had a broken arm, ran down from upstairs. When he saw the other person lying on the ground, he immediately turned around and ran back. Rinpochen heaved a sigh of relief and slowly followed him up the stairs. He thought to himself that this was considered legitimate self-defense. It should be fine to call the police, right? He wasn't afraid of anything else, but he was afraid that he would be detained for a few days. If that happened, he would be in big trouble. If he disappeared from the detention center, he wouldn't be able to explain himself. That burly man pointed the knife in Rinpochen's direction. His whole body was trembling and his face was covered in sweat. It was unknown whether it was because of pain or fear. Originally he was prepared to kill Rinpochen, but he didn't expect Rinpochen to kill him. At the same time, blood was spurting out of his wrist. "If you don't go to the hospital, you will probably bleed to death," Rinpochen kindly reminded him. That person being hacked to death by Rinpochen should be considered legitimate self-defense. If this person were to bleed to death, it wouldn't be easy to determine. Rinpochen was afraid that there would be trouble. That burly man stared at him fiercely and rushed over to stab him again. However, he only had one hand and it wasn't his right hand that he was used to. How could he be a match for Rinpochen? Rinpochen's knife slashed at his chest and he immediately fell to the ground. However, he was still breathing and didn't die. It was just that he bled a little too much and his ribs might have been fractured. Rinpochen then relaxed, picked up the phone and called the police. "I have two people who broke into my house to steal and tried to silence me with a knife. I accidentally hacked one of them to death and the other one is half dead." Rinpochen reported his address to the police, following which he called Chin Ching. Chin Ching sleepily picked up the phone. "Big brother, what time is it now?" "I killed someone." Rinpochen's words immediately woke Chin Ching up. He quickly asked, "What's the situation? Where is it? Does anyone know?" Upon hearing Chin Ching's words, Rinpochen felt warmth in his heart. After all, they were friends. Chin Ching's first reaction wasn't to call the police to arrest him. Instead, it sounded like Chin Ching wanted to help him deal with the aftermath. "There were two burglars at my house. They broke into my house to steal and tried to kill me with a knife. During the fight, I hacked one of them to death and the other one was seriously injured," Rinpochen said unhurriedly. "How are you?" Rinpochen heard Chin Ching's relieved voice coming from the other end of the phone. "My palms are all sweaty and I was scared to death," Rinpochen sighed. "You aren't injured?" Chin Ching was astonished. Based on what he knew, Rinpochen had never even fought before. Yet, he single-handedly killed two people who used knives to commit murder? "You can't wait for me to get injured, right?" Rinpochen said unhappily. "I will call the police. Hurry up and get me out." "Don't worry, it will be fine. I will be there very soon," Chin Ching consoled him and hung up the phone. Rinpochen leaned against the wall and sat down. When he was talking to Chin Ching on the phone, his tone was still considered calm. However, his heart felt like it was about to jump out of his chest. Fighting hand-to-hand with a knife. It was too thrilling. It was too exciting. Rinpochen's adrenaline was surging. He was excited and scared at the same time. The police moved very quickly. In 6 to 7 minutes they arrived at the neighborhood and went upstairs to knock on the door. Only then did Rinpochen go downstairs to open the door. He almost slipped on the blood on the floor. When the police came in, they saw a person lying on the floor of the staircase. His body was covered in blood. "There is another one upstairs," Rinpochen pointed upstairs. Two police officers stood on his left and right and restrained him to interrogate him about the situation. The other two officers went upstairs to investigate the scene. Rinpochen briefly explained the situation, including the conversation between him and the two men. With an innocent face and lingering fear, he pointed at the person lying on the floor and said, "He still has a few pieces of my jade pendants in his pocket. If they took my things I would have tolerated it. But who would have thought that they would take my things and try to silence me? I was scared to death." The two police officers used a recording pen to record the situation. The ambulance had also arrived downstairs and sent the two men away. Rinpoche then followed them to the police station. Just as he entered the police station, the identities of the two men were investigated. They were the murderers of the massacre in a certain city and had fled to this area. Now it was clear why the two men wanted to kill Rinpoche to silence him. As long as Rinpoche called the police and revealed their appearance, they would immediately be arrested by the entire city. Therefore they might as well go all out and kill Rinpoche to silence him. They did not expect to meet a tough nut to crack this time. 10 minutes later, Qin also arrived at the police station. After asking about the situation, he patted Rinpoche's shoulder and gave him a thumbs up. An ordinary person would have panicked in such a situation. It was not easy to escape, let alone counterattack. After giving his statement at the police station and waiting for the report, Rinpoche and Qin finally walked out of the police station in the wee hours of the morning. In fact, the police officers had already judged the situation at the crime scene. For the next few hours, Rinpoche directly lay on the table in the interrogation room and slept. As an ordinary person, he was actually able to sleep after encountering such a situation. This made many of the police officers who saw this extremely impressed. "I'm hungry, shall we go for breakfast?" Rinpoche turned his head and asked Qin after leaving the police station. Qin looked at him with a weird expression and said, "Most people are not used to killing people, especially in such a bloody and thrilling scene. You slept and ate. Those who don't know would think that you are a repeat offender. I can't possibly skip meals and sleep just because of this, right? Don't forget that this matter is not over yet. Don't leave searching for the time being and wait for the verdict. Logically speaking, you should still be inside," Qin said. Although the matter was almost settled, otherwise even if he used some connections, Rinpoche would not be released so quickly. Chapter 240. His surroundings were dark blue, and the only light coming from above prevented the surroundings from falling into complete darkness. The omnipresent water pressure pressed down on Rinpoche's muscles and bones, but Rinpoche was trying his best to go down. All thoughts were thrown out of his mind and there was only one thought in his mind: go down. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly woke up when he lost all his strength. Phew! Rinpoche gasped for breath. Just now, it was as if all the air in his chest had been squeezed out. After a while, Rinpoche clenched his fists. They were soft and powerless, but his eyes were shining. Today he actually dived 1 meter more. One had to know that after practicing Rui visualization for so long, he could only dive half an inch more every day after taking a medicinal bath. Every 7 days he could only dive 1 meter more. 7 days was the period in which he absorbed all the medicinal effects of a medicinal bath. However, today he dived 1 meter more than the day before yesterday. Why did such a change happen? Rinpoche was deep in thought. There were no other changes these days. He didn't practice yesterday, but today he dived 1 meter more, which was equivalent to absorbing the effects of a medicinal bath. The only thing that happened in the past 2 days was that he killed one person and seriously injured another last night. As for killing and seriously injuring people, he couldn't think of any relationship between his progress and cultivation. In that case, was there any change in his body during that soul-stirring counterattack? Rinpoche felt that the possibility of unlocking one's potential during a life-and-death battle was the highest. No expert could become the world's #1 by hiding under a cliff and practicing hard for 30 years. Usually, such people would jump out and shout, "I'm already the world's #1, and then be smacked to death by a shoe that came flying out of nowhere. Life and death battles not only allowed people to master various skills, reactions, judgment, and the experience of encountering danger, but also caused some changes in the human body. Rinpoche felt that this wasn't difficult to understand. This was because the human body had always had a lot of secrets. When encountering danger, some people could even unleash a strength that was several times stronger than usual. This was the potential of the human body. This should have happened to him this time, right? On one hand, it was a life and death battle, and on top of that, it was the martial arts that he practiced. Should he go back and try it out? Let the guards practice with him? Rinpoche thought about it and felt that this idea wasn't very reliable. Firstly, sparring was different from a real life and death battle. Secondly, he reckoned that he wouldn't even be able to defeat the guard with one hand. Finding himself a 10-year-old kid was more like it. No matter what, it was better to go back and give it a try. There was no harm. If he really had to go through life and death battles to train, then it was better for him to continue slowly taking medicinal baths. If he went looking for stimulation when he had nothing to do, he might really die. His mind was filled with thoughts and he grew more and more tired. He didn't know when he would fall asleep. Rinpoche didn't know how long he had slept. He was awakened by hunger. His stomach was like a drum, and the feeling of hunger was really unbearable. When he got out of bed, he looked out the window and saw that the sky was still dark. He looked at his phone and realized that he had only slept for 3 hours. However, his stomach was already rebelling. Other than eating, Rinpoche had no other thoughts. When he arrived downstairs, the bloodstains on the ground had been cleaned up, and the smell of blood had long disappeared. As for the fact that someone had just died, which was unlucky for others, he did not care at all. After eating a bowl of instant noodles, Rinpoche touched his stomach and felt that he had come back to life. Then he felt a strong sense of hunger again. He ate 3 bowls of instant noodles in a row, but his hunger was still not gone. He cooked 5 packets of frozen dumplings and ate them before he felt a little better. Damn it, I'm finally alive. Rinpoche touched his stomach and groaned. Could this be the change caused by the increase in strength? Does the body need a lot of energy? Rinpoche pondered. Just like the Empress, if she relied on eating to replenish her energy, the amount of food she ate would make an ordinary person's eyeballs pop out. It was the same for him this time. In the past, he had to absorb medicinal baths to increase his strength. This time he completely relied on food. It was no wonder that he felt so hungry. He went to the living room and picked up the tension machine that he had used before. He casually tested it. It was easier than the previous time, which meant that his strength had increased. Every time he absorbed all the medicinal effects of the medicinal bath, he could dive 1 meter deeper and increase his strength by 15 kilograms. It was very likely that it would be the same this time. Before the first medicinal bath, his hands should be able to lift objects that weighed 130 kilograms. Now he could lift objects that weighed 190 kilograms? Even though it might not be comparable to an ordinary worker, this kind of improvement was enough to make him happy. Rinpoche went back to bed and slept. The next day he went to buy the solar crystal panel and battery that he had his eyes on previously. This solar crystal panel could store 3.6 kilowatts of electricity. He only needed 2 sets to maintain the lights in Yangshin Palace Hall. If he bought 2 more sets, he might even be able to get the Empress a television or a game console. Following which he bought 2 Chinese-style floor lamps. The style was similar to the palace lamps in the past. There was a wind on the top and a paper lantern hung below. There were even flowers and birds painted on the lantern. The light bulb inside was 20 watts. The battery could last for 90 hours, which was sufficient. Next time he would buy a battery as well as a spare one. 2 days later, Rinpoche brought the 2 floor lamps and a battery back to Pingle Park. The battery, the solar crystal panel, and the inverter weighed 70 kilograms. The 2 floor lamps added up to 17 kilograms. There were still 8 kilograms of empty space. Rinpoche brought some candies, popcorn, and hot pot base ingredients. It was morning when he returned to Pingle Park. Rinpoche first soaked in a medicinal bath. Following which, he used the walkie-talkie to call the Empress. A moment later, the walkie-talkie was connected. Before Rinpoche could say anything, he heard a clamor coming from the other end of the walkie-talkie. Tong Jinye, you old man. Today I will let you have a taste of the sharpness of my saber. Sir Qin, I will fight you with only one hand. Tong Jinye's voice came from the other end of the walkie-talkie. Wow, I am so angry. Today I will definitely chop you up. Following which there was a clamor. Some were jeering and some were jeering. Rinpoche actually didn't hear anyone trying to stop the fight. Rinpoche was speechless. This was the imperial court of Dayo? It was indeed filled with the style of the aboriginals. Qin Chuan was the Minister of War, right? The blood of the Minister of War and the Minister of Works was spilled every 5 steps in the imperial court. If this happened in modern times, it would be on the headlines for half a month. Just as Rinpoche was listening attentively, the Empress switched off the walkie-talkie. This made Rinpoche feel very regretful. Only until noon did someone come to Pingle Park to look for Rinpoche. Deputy Prefect Rin, Her Majesty summons you to Yangshin Palace Hall to accompany her for lunch. Rinpoche asked the Imperial Guards to help carry the box all the way to Yangshin Palace Hall. The Empress was sitting on the couch with her hands on her head. He wasn't sure if she was having a headache because of the matters in the Imperial Court. Seeing the box being lifted, the Empress raised her head and asked curiously, "What's this?" "Floor lamp." Her Majesty doesn't have to suffer from the smoke of the oil lamp anymore. Rinpoche laughed. After lunch, Rinpoche bustled back and forth to unpack the box. 2 floor lamps were placed on both sides of the Empress's wooden couch. The style of the ancient palace lamps was just right for this palace hall. Rinpoche placed the battery behind the wooden couch. Then he plugged in the table lamp and switched on the power cord. The floor lamp immediately lit up. A warm yellow light shone through the lampshade. It wasn't glaring and was just nice to illuminate the surroundings of the wooden couch. Qing Yuan and Hong Luan's small mouths formed an O shape. Previously they saw Rinpoche taking out a bunch of boxes, wires and other things, but they didn't see him adding oil to the lamp wick. How did the lamp light up? The Empress felt the light coming from both sides of the lamp and nodded her head slightly. This kind of brightness was very comfortable in the palace hall. It was slightly brighter than the oil lamp and it wouldn't flicker. Most importantly, she didn't have to suffer from the smoke anymore. Just as Rinpoche was looking at the floor lamp with a satisfied look on his face and felt that he had done a great thing by spreading the light to the other world, the Empress suddenly asked, "Did you bring the arrow that you promised me? Did you bring it?" Chapter 241. Did you bring the arrow that you promised me? The Empress's voice drifted into Rinpoche's ears. Rinpoche was immediately petrified. I actually forgot about it. Furthermore, the Empress actually remembered. Rinpoche was at a loss and looked like a bitter gourd. When the Empress saw Rinpoche's expression, she immediately understood and said faintly, "The crime of deceiving the monarch." Rinpoche almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "Your Majesty, I have been busy preparing the floor lamp and the battery," Rinpoche hurriedly said. The crime of deceiving the monarch. Rinpoche wanted to cry but had no tears. He felt that those people who filmed the Qing dynasty should be strangled to death. If it wasn't for them, how would the Empress have learned this sentence? "This time when I went, I encountered a huge change." Rinpoche immediately changed his story. Oh. The Empress was slightly curious when she heard this. At least, Rinpoche seemed to be fine now, which meant that there were no major problems. "The 2 of you can leave." The Empress saw Rinpoche's gaze and waved her hand at Hong Luan and Qing Yuan. Qing Yuan looked unhappy. She still wanted to hear what exactly happened to Deputy Ren. At the same time, she was also curious about where he had gone. These days, the 2 of them kept discovering strange things in the palace. For example, this lamp that could light up without adding oil or burning, and the box that could speak in the Empress's hand. This caused the 2 of them to have all kinds of speculations. Unfortunately, the Empress didn't allow them to listen at this moment. "Speak," the Empress said after the 2 of them left. "Your Majesty, you may not know this, but this time when I just returned, I heard someone making a noise upstairs. I immediately tensed up and thought that an accident had happened. At this moment, the culprit directly stabbed me with a dagger. Your Majesty knows about my situation and was stunned at that time. I barely dodged the attack. However, the other party wasn't just 1 person but 2. Rinpoche spoke for more than 10 minutes. He had the voice and appearance to describe his encounter with a thief and counterattack like a Hollywood blockbuster. It was thrilling and full of ups and downs. If one listened to his story, they would definitely think that he encountered Marines and not 2 thieves. For this reason, he specially showed the wound on his ribs to the Empress. In the end, I stayed in the police station for 3 days before I was released. During these 3 days, I thought about your Majesty day and night. After I left the police station, I immediately went to retrieve this battery and the floor lamp before rushing back to see your Majesty. My empty heart was finally at ease and I finally found a place to belong." Rinpoche finally spouted nonsense with a straight face. The Empress looked at him and shook her head. "Forget it, I'll let you off this time." Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. "It's not that I don't want to, but there have been too many twists and turns. I am physically and mentally exhausted after staying at the police station for a few days, and I miss your Majesty, so I decided to postpone this matter." "I can't tell that you are physically and mentally exhausted, but your face is indeed glowing," the Empress said casually with a smile in her eyes. She didn't know how much of what Rinpoche said was true, but it was true that something had happened. In fact, most of the time, women didn't care whether what you said was true or not. As long as she felt that what you said was true and she was willing to believe it, it was fine. Even though the Empress felt that what Rinpoche said was a little exaggerated, but seeing that Rinpoche was really injured, she didn't really care. Instead, she thought of another matter. "Your skills are indeed too weak. When you encounter danger, you don't even have the ability to protect yourself. From tomorrow onwards, I will get someone to teach you martial arts. You must not slack off. Otherwise, if you are killed, even if I can avenge you, you won't be able to come back to life. The previous time was an example, and it will be the same this time, the Empress continued. There was a trace of concern in her voice. It was very soft, but it could be felt. Thank you very much, Your Majesty, Rinpoche said softly. He also knew that what the Empress said was right. In such a world, no one knew when and what kind of things would happen. In particular, the difference in the level of martial arts between him and others was too big. The corresponding danger was also greatly increased. If he really encountered something like the previous time, he could only resign himself to fate. I will do my best, Rinpoche added. The Empress didn't care about his determination at all. I will be watching you. Rinpoche. That afternoon the Empress sat on a chair. Beside her was a small table with fruits, sweets, popcorn and wine. Behind her was a huge imperial canopy that blocked the sunlight like a parasol. Beside her were Qing Yuan and Hong Luan. One of them was massaging her shoulders while the other was fanning her. Rinpoche turned his head to look at the Empress, then looked at the bodyguard in front of him whose build was similar to Schwarzenegger's. He was dumbfounded. Didn't she say that she would teach him? Why did she go straight to the arena? It's faster to learn by sparring directly. This was what the Empress said just now. But now was it a matter of sparring? Wasn't he about to be beaten up by the other party? Let's begin. Why are you dilly-dallying? The Empress ate popcorn, a grape and a mouthful of wine. It fully illustrated what it meant to be an onlooker. Deputy Prefect Ren, I will be gentler. That bodyguard tried to hold back his laughter. Rinpoche really wanted to spit on his face. Your Majesty, I feel that it's better for me to learn some moves first. Rinpoche couldn't help but turn his head and say, It's all right, you will learn after a fight, the Empress casually replied. Rinpoche looked at the muscular bodyguard in front of him helplessly. He made up his mind, shouted loudly and dashed over. His imposing manner was overbearing like a mad dog. Then he flew back at a speed faster than when he dashed over. There was a huge footprint on his chest. Rinpoche clutched his chest as he lay on the ground and looked up at the sky. He muttered to himself, Oh life! Don't be lazy, I'm watching. The Empress was all smiles as she ate popcorn and drank erguoto. More than 2 hours had passed. Rinpoche was lying on the ground. His whole body was covered in dust. Other than his face, which was still fine, there wasn't a single part of his body that was fine. Your Majesty, I really can't do it. I feel like I'm seriously injured. Rinpoche's voice was full of grief, like a cuckoo crying blood. Oh, in that case, I will teach you a set of boxing techniques tomorrow. You can try again, the Empress said. Rinpoche lay on the ground and refused to get up no matter what. If the Empress had said this earlier, he wouldn't have had to suffer this beating. At this moment, the sun had already set. Rinpoche looked at the setting sun and thought about how he used to run under the setting sun, as well as the youth that had finally passed away. You are too crafty and very lazy. If it was someone else who had this opportunity, they wouldn't hesitate to train hard every day, but you didn't even think about it. If you don't suffer a little, you will definitely be lazy. In the future, you will handle your work in the morning, practice your boxing techniques in the afternoon, and practice sparring on the other days, the Empress said sternly. After hearing these words, Rinpoche knew that his good days were completely over. Chapter 242. How can this thing emit light? There's actually no smoke at all. Shi Qin, Ko Zhihai, Tong Jinye, Qin Chuan, Tu Wan, and a few other big shots surrounded the 2-floor lamps in Yangxin Palace Hall and exclaimed in admiration. The Empress stood in front of a mirror not far away and ignored the people behind her. This thing stores sunlight before releasing it. Therefore, it doesn't require lamp oil or smoke, Rinpoche said nonsense to the group of country bumpkins. It's indeed a treasure. Everyone nodded after hearing this. Deputy Prefect Rin, do you still have this treasure? Tong Jinye asked. Of course not. In fact, it wasn't a big problem to give each of these big shots a solar battery, but Rinpoche didn't have any intention of giving them something that was ahead of the times. The Empress had some understanding of Earth, but in the eyes of these people, this thing was more magical. It wouldn't be a good thing if it was everywhere. Things like walkie-talkies were too useful. There was no need for solar batteries and lamps as they were meaningless. The group of people surrounded the floor lamps and exclaimed in admiration for a long time, fully satisfying the Empress's desire to show off. Rinpoche felt that she invited so many people to have a meal in the palace just to show off this new toy. Although there weren't many of these things on Earth, they were still very magical in this world. Previously, so many people were doubtful about her choice of a husband. At this moment, she was able to use the electric lamps on Earth to scare those big shots. This made her feel much better. During lunch, everyone was full of praise for the food in the palace. The two shameless old men, Tong Jinya and Qin Chuan, immediately licked the plates. Everyone was also very tempted by the spices that Rinpoche took out. Although there were some spices planted in the beast park, it would take some time for them to mature. Furthermore, the amount was not enough to make anything. They could only hope that Rinpoche would quickly add more spices. After lunch, Tong Jinya pulled Rinpoche to one side and said, "I heard that Deputy Prefect Ren wants to buy land? I have a few hundred acres of land and can transfer some to you. What do you think, Deputy Prefect Ren?" "Sir Tong, it's not me who wants to buy land, it's Her Majesty who wants to buy land." Rinpoche immediately corrected Tong Jinya. However, Tong Jinya's ears were really sharp. Teng Hulu and Tai Dao had only been out for 2 days and he already knew about it. In fact, Rinpoche had forgotten about one thing. That day at the Beast Park, he mentioned that he was going to look for some land to plant spices. "It's all the same," Tong Jinya replied indifferently. The imperial family had not bought any land for many years. Everyone knew whose idea it was to suddenly buy land. "How many mu of land can Sir Tong transfer? What do you want?" Rinpoche asked. He didn't believe that Tong Jinya was inspired by Her Majesty and immediately sold a portion of his family's land to the Empress after knowing that she wanted to buy land. 50 mu. Spices, at least 10 mu of spices. "I won't take them for free, just sell them to me," Tong Jinya immediately said. Rinpoche felt that this amount was pretty good. 50 mu of land wasn't a small amount. This morning, Teng Hulu came to the palace and said that the fields around Lan City were distributed to the soldiers who had rendered meritorious service when the country was founded. Although the annual harvest was not much, not many people were willing to sell. Although they could buy spices, they were scattered all over the place and were far from Rinpoche's requirements. "I can only sell them to you for 3 years, Rinpoche added. "What if I transfer 100 mu of land to you?" Tong Jinya thought for a while and asked. "I will sell 20 mu of spices to you for 5 years. There is no need for more than that. By then, the production of spices should be very large and you should be able to buy them easily," Rinpoche said. In fact, if they were to plant their own spices, they might not even need 5 years. However, they couldn't possibly plant the spices the moment the Empress planted them, right? Wouldn't that be snatching food from the mouth of the imperial family? Rinpoche felt that 5 years was more or less enough. Tong Jinya thought for a while and nodded his head in agreement. Other than the spices for his own use, the rest of the spices could be sold to Great Xia and the Yin nation. He should be able to earn quite a lot. Tong Jinya was a businessman who was held back by the Ministry of Works. Although there were not many business-minded people in Dayo, there were still some. Especially people like Tong Jinya. "I will take my leave first." Tong Jinya looked at Tu Wan and nodded his head at Rinpoche. Tu Wan and Tong Jinya had the same goal, so Rinpoche gave Tong Jinya the same exchange plan. It had to be said that the officials in Dayo didn't have much land in their hands. Rank 3 officials like Tong Jinya and Tu Wan, who were already at the top, actually had a few hundred to 1,000 mu of land in their hands. If Rinpoche didn't hear it with his own ears, he wouldn't dare to believe it. Even on the surface it was still too little. Furthermore, what the two of them said might be true. The Aboriginals actually didn't care much about land because these lands were distributed to the meritorious soldiers in the past. It was more of a kind of glory for them to keep the land near Lan City. In the afternoon, the Empress and Rinpoche stood at the martial arts arena in the palace. This was the first time Rinpoche knew that there was such a place in the palace. There were many stone locks, stone balls and other things in the surroundings. "Watch my moves." The Empress was still wearing her red muslin dress. After she finished speaking, she stood there and practiced a set of boxing techniques. When she started her first move, Rinpoche's mind immediately shifted away from the Empress's figure. Austere. This was Rinpoche's first feeling. As soon as the Empress started her moves, Rinpoche felt a murderous aura around him, as if he was on a battlefield. Mighty. The Empress's moves weren't fast or complicated, but every punch made an explosive sound in the air, as if the air had exploded. More importantly, the Empress's slow punches actually had the imposing manner of a magnificent army, making people unable to stand in front of her and subconsciously retreat. Boom. As the Empress slapped the air, 6 or 7 1-meter square slabs in front of her exploded. "Your Majesty's martial arts are unparalleled and unparalleled. Invincible in the East, I am the only one." Rinpoche woke up from the feeling of being on a battlefield and immediately shouted. Umph. The Empress's tone was a little higher and seemed to be a little mischievous. Following which, her voice became cold again and asked, "Did you see it clearly?" Rinpoche was speechless. "Your Majesty, I only care about using my eyes to pursue your heroic appearance." Rinpoche laughed dryly. The Empress raised her eyebrows and stared intently at Rinpoche. "I personally went down to demonstrate for you, yet you were actually distracted? Just now, I saw a murderous aura around me as if I was on a battlefield. Your Majesty, you were invincible in the midst of a magnificent army, but I was too slow to see this move," Rinpoche quickly said. Chapter 243. Rinpoche's upper body was exposed as he stood in the middle of the arena. Over the past few months he had grown quite a bit of muscle. At the very least, his original ribs were nowhere to be seen. At this moment, his eyes were filled with determination as he stared at his opponent. Even if Qin Qing was beside him, he wouldn't be able to recognize this sharp-eyed, sword-like, ruthless man. He was actually his friend who many people thought was ordinary and unremarkable. The laptop behind him was connected to the sound system and was playing the song, "Into the Battlefield." It was a hot-blooded high school soundtrack. When he watched this movie, this music simply made his blood boil. At this moment, the strong rhythm and dense drumming made Rinpoche's adrenaline surge and his fighting spirit surge. He felt that if he had a gun he would be able to carry it onto the battlefield. At this moment, Rinpoche's opponent's attention was obviously attracted by the thing that was making the sound not far behind him. His gaze wandered and was fixated on the sound system. Chance. Rinpoche's eyes lit up. He stomped on the ground and dashed toward his opponent like a wild dog released from its leash. Bang! Then he flew back at a faster speed and landed heavily on the ground with a 46-yard large footprint on his chest. Ouch! Rinpoche groaned as he lay on the ground. "Your Majesty, I need to change my opponent. You can choose from the Imperial Guards." The Empress, who was eating popcorn not far away, said generously. "Can I lower the age of the Imperial Guard? I haven't even reached the man-wheel level." Rinpoche cried. Oh. Rinpoche's current Imperial Guard was about 30 years old. For the Aboriginals he hadn't reached the peak yet. Furthermore, the Imperial Guards weren't the most skilled. At the same level, the winged cavalry was slightly stronger than the Imperial Guards. "I feel that I can give it a try with an opponent around 10 years old." Rinpoche seriously stated his request. The Empress almost laughed at Rinpoche's shameless behavior. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan looked at him with disdain. Could he be any more shameless? Meanwhile, Rinpoche's opponent was looking at the sky at a 45-degree angle. He didn't even use 5% of his strength just now. What else did he want? Isn't this a form of sparring? With my current strength, I'm still no match for him even if his hands and feet are tied up. Rinpoche got up from the ground and pleaded earnestly. The Empress squinted at him for a long time and finally said, "Okay." Rinpoche was overjoyed when he heard this. "Your Majesty, you are accomplished in both literature and martial arts. You are benevolent to the common people and are willing to deliver all living things from suffering. Let's continue today. I will change your opponent for the sparring session the day after tomorrow," the Empress said. Alas. Rinpoche sighed and struck a pose. Then he stepped to the rhythm of a song by Nightwish and charged toward his opponent like a wild dog that had escaped its leash. Bang! This was the 7th day since the Empress started teaching him the fist technique. These 7 days could be said to be filled with tears and snot. Just the 8 moves of the Fist of Death were enough to make Rinpoche suffer. Rinpoche's bones had already taken shape, and there were many movements that he couldn't perform. Then the Empress ordered 2 Imperial Guards to press down on his shoulders and form a straight line. At that time, his voice was like the sound of a pig being slaughtered, and it spread throughout the entire palace for a long time. For 3 days in a row, Rinpoche's legs were splayed outwards when he walked. It felt like his legs were like noodles. He had to practice martial arts every day, but this was still okay. At most, it would be a little tiring. He still had to get beaten up every 2 days, and this made Rinpoche's heart full of regrets. Today he finally couldn't help but bring up the idea that he had been pondering over for a few days. At night, a female official helped to disperse the extravasated blood on his body. Rinpoche's body was also smeared with a layer of Indian divine oil. This was what Rinpoche called it. After applying the oil, his whole body would reflect light. However, the effect was indeed excellent. Every time he was smeared with Indian divine oil to disperse the extravasated blood, his whole body would feel comfortable. The next day, not a single scar could be seen on his body. However, he didn't know that only a small number of aboriginals could afford this Indian divine oil. Even though it wasn't considered priceless, it was still extremely expensive. Even the children of the court officials could only use it occasionally. It was impossible for them to rub it all over their body every 2 days like Rinpoche. A bottle of this medicine cost 100 taels of silver. Using one bottle at a time would cost more than 10,000 taels of silver a year. Even for the empress, this was considered a considerable amount. Caretaker Shi was a rank 9 official, and his monthly salary was only 6 taels of silver. The annual rent for a shop on Jingyang Street was only slightly more than 100 taels of silver. The medicine used for the medicinal bath was even more expensive. A single medicinal bath cost 1,000 taels of silver and could only last for 7 days. Just the 2 medicines that Rinpoche used cost 50,000 taels of silver a year. Dayo wasn't rich. The entire imperial palace only spent 40,000 taels of silver a year. Most of it was spent on the salaries of the imperial guards, female officials, and maids. Rinpoche's expenses alone were more than the annual expenses of the entire imperial palace. The empress could only rely on the income from the gold and silver mines for a small surplus. Coupled with the expenses on Rinpoche, the imperial palace's income immediately became a deficit. The next day, Rinpoche hurriedly went out and met up with Feng Ho, the director of the Department of Ordnance, and Tong Yen, the director of the Department of Construction. He received news in the morning that the pile of bricks used to burn the furnace had been produced. However, they had all turned into slag. Along the way, Rinpoche sat on the back of the fork-horned cow and pondered the reason behind the bumpy ride. Since cement could be produced from burning, then some of the ores in this world should be similar to those on Earth. Furthermore, the main ingredient for burning bricks was clay. Such a situation shouldn't have occurred. When he arrived at the Jingtian furnace, the supervisor, Tai Mu, hurriedly welcomed him. "Sir. Yesterday the furnace fire was extinguished. We wanted to follow your instructions to take out the bricks, only to find out. Let's wait and see." Rinpoche waved his hand and hurriedly rushed to the furnace. The bricks inside had not been taken out yet. Rinpoche went down the ladder and saw that only half of the bricks were left. The rest had turned into slag and fell to the bottom of the furnace. The remaining bricks looked cracked on the surface. Many of them were bulging. When he touched them with his hand, they immediately turned into fragments. Rinpoche frowned. What was going on? "Zorin, how is it?" Tong Yen shouted from above. After drinking together at the brothel, everyone was very familiar with each other. Rinpoche frowned and climbed out of the furnace with dust all over his body. He said to Tai Mu, "Do it again. I want to see what the problem is." Then he said to Tong Yen, "I'm not sure. Let's see." While the craftsman of the Jingtian furnace was working, Rinpoche took out a piece of paper and compared it step by step to see which step was the problem. "There's no problem?" Rinpoche muttered. He personally saw the craftsman of the Jingtian furnace crushing, stirring, and kneading the brick step by step. There was no problem at all. Could it be that there's something wrong with this piece of paper? Rinpoche started to suspect if there was a problem with the information he found. There might be something that wasn't written on this piece of paper. "Sir Rin, what's this?" Tong Yen and Feng Ho leaned their heads over. Just now they saw him holding a piece of paper and mumbling to himself. "I remember some things," Rinpoche replied casually. In any case, the two of them couldn't understand it. "I've never seen this kind of writing before." Tong Yen glanced at it and shook his head. Rinpoche ignored him. It would be strange if he had seen it before. "Hey, what are you guys doing?" Rinpoche looked at the craftsman as he sent the kneaded bricks into the furnace. "Sir, you said to burn it." The craftsman looked at him blankly. Dry it in the shade first. How are we going to burn it if we send it in like this?" Rinpoche's eyes widened. It was clearly written on the paper that it had to be dried in the shade. "Sir, you told us to burn it in this way the last time." Tai Mu was dumbfounded. "How is that possible? The bricks haven't even dried yet, how can they be burned?" Rinpoche stared at him. "Sir Rin, you didn't say to dry it in the shade the last time." "This is how we burn it," Feng Ho said righteously. Rinpoche looked at Feng Ho with disdain and said, "How is that possible?" He thought to himself, "Damn it, did you really not say it the last time?" Thinking about it carefully, it seemed that the last time the cement and the bricks were all done in one day. How could there be time to dry it in the shade? Chapter 244. Rinpoche faced his opponent with a solemn look. After being beaten up a few times, the Empress finally changed his opponent. Following his shameless request, she changed his opponent to a 10-year-old child. Not only that, it was a girl. She was dressed in white silk clothes and had delicate skin. She looked like a delicious Lolita. Upon seeing this Lolita, Rinpoche's mind was filled with the death penalty of at least 3 years in prison. Your Majesty, I can't do it. Rinpoche frowned for a long time before sighing and turning his head to look at the Empress. If you can win, I will give you a reward. The Empress's voice carried a hint of charm. Rinpoche listened to the Empress's voice and didn't get carried away. The fact that the Empress dared to say such a thing clearly showed that he couldn't beat this Lolita. Why don't you change your opponent to an 8-year-old? The Empress, Qing Yuan, Hong Luan, the Imperial Guards, and even the Lolita were shocked. Each and every one of them widened their eyes. Can you be any more shameless? I'm just joking. Why don't you change your opponent to a boy? Rinpoche laughed mischievously. If it was a boy, he should be able to do it. Defeat her first, the Empress said while eating shaved ice. Rinpoche sighed, lowered his head, and jogged over. He opened his notebook and played Nightwish She's Mystical In. The atmosphere immediately exploded. The little Loli stared curiously at the 2 big boxes that were producing the sound with a pair of cute eyes. Her fingers subconsciously followed the rhythm of Nightwish song. How do I address you? Rinpoche finally put on a serious look, cupped his fists at the Lolita and said calmly. The Lolita glanced at him, cupped her fists and said, Tong Lan. Rinpoche felt that this Lolita was definitely not from an ordinary family. Her silk clothes weren't something that an ordinary person could afford. When he heard her surname was Tong, he subconsciously felt that she might be related to Tong Jinya. How is she related to the Minister of Works, Sir Tong? Rinpoche asked again. That's my grandfather, Tong Lan said softly. Oh, as expected. Rinpoche nodded. Then he said, a few days ago, I went to a brothel with your grandfather. The little Loli nodded without any reaction. Come on, one look and I can tell that you don't know what a brothel is. You have wasted your words, Rinpoche thought to himself when he saw her acting like this. At this moment, the Empress's cold voice sounded beside his ear. You really can't forget it. Why don't I accompany you? This subject is using tactics. As the saying goes, attacking the heart is the best. The best strategy is to attack the stratagem. Rinpoche saw that the little Lolita didn't have any reaction, but the Empress reacted first. He immediately turned around and spoke in a deadpan manner. Everyone had a look of contempt on their faces. Don't you have any shame? Rinpoche helplessly turned his head and looked at the obviously absent-minded Lolita. He crouched down slightly and exerted force with his legs to scuttle forward. Unparalleled vanguard. Rinpoche shouted. When the crowd saw him make his move, they finally perked up. Then when they saw his legs kick 6 times in a row, their faces twitched. This move was clearly a horse-stomping chain kick. The moves of the Fist of Death were simple and ferocious. It was considered a widely spread fist technique in the army. Even if the crowd had not practiced it before, they more or less had some understanding of it. When they saw him make his move, they immediately realized that what he shouted and what he used were 2 completely different moves. The opponent was a 10-year-old child, yet he was still so shameless. These few days, Rinpoche had once again refreshed everyone's impression of how shameless he was. Bang! Rinpoche's nostrils spurted out blood as he fell to the ground. There was a small footprint on his face. Tong Lan lowered her head and looked at Rinpoche, who was lying on the ground with a look of disdain. Liar! Rinpoche covered his face. He couldn't even defeat a 10-year-old girl. There was no way he could continue living like this. Everyone looked up at the sky. A moment later, Rinpoche, who had another footprint on the left side of his face, stood opposite Tong Lan again. Do you know how much 3,000 taels of silver is? How long is it enough for the Tong residents to spend? Rinpoche asked with a serious look on his face. Of course I know. My monthly allowance is only 3 taels of silver. The Tong residents' monthly expenditure is also less than 1,000 taels of silver. Tong Lan raised her small face and replied. I owe your grandfather 3,000 taels of silver. If you slap my face again, I won't return the money, Rinpoche threatened. The Empress, Hong Luan and Qing Yuan, the Imperial Guards, Tong Lan widened her eyes. Before today she had never thought that someone could be so shameless. Chance. Rinpoche saw that she was distracted and immediately shouted, 100 battles on the battlefield. Both of his fists stretched out and stirred, creating an indomitable momentum. Everyone watched helplessly as he shouted 100 battles on the battlefield, but in reality he was using unparalleled vanguard. Bah! Rinpoche held his stomach and fell head first onto the stone slab. I didn't slap his face this time. It's only right and proper to repay a debt. Grandfather said that if someone owes you money and doesn't return it, you should beat him until he returns it. Tong Lan lowered her head and said seriously. Rinpoche suffered a lot from this day. Finally, he sadly realized that he couldn't even defeat a 10-year-old child. Even if the other party was Tong Jinye's granddaughter and had practiced martial arts since young, she was still a 10-year-old child. Sitting in Yangshin Palace Hall, the Empress saw his downcast face and finally couldn't help but say something. Now that you know the difference in strength, you just have to work harder in the future. Your Majesty. Rinpoche raised his head gratefully. How about changing it to an 8-year-old opponent? I can't thank you enough. The Empress felt like slapping Rinpoche to death. Why didn't she realize that he was so shameless in the past? Your Majesty, the Aboriginals are indeed blessed by the heavens. Their individual strength is peerless and I still need to work harder. Rinpoche immediately corrected himself. The Empress's expression became better. She took out a piece of paper from under the cushion on the couch and threw it to Rinpoche. Take a look. Rinpoche received the paper doubtfully and opened it to carefully read the words on it. After a while, Rinpoche raised his head in bewilderment and asked, Poison Warrior? Jiasu had lived his entire life with such a title, and now it was pinned on him? Would Jiasu be so angry that he would jump out of his coffin? The Empress nodded slightly and said, Previously in Great Xia we poisoned about 8,000 people to death with sarin gas. Including the ones killed by the winged cavalry, Great Xia lost a total of 13,000 people. In addition, the 9 pavilions were also destroyed. After investigating for a long time, Great Xia determined that you were the culprit. After all, no one in Dayo is good at using poison, and you are the most suspicious. Great Xia might assassinate you. After all, according to their judgment, your existence is too dangerous to Great Xia, second only to the general-in-chief who supports the nation, Hongwu. I feel that the people they sent are already on their way. Rinpoche continued to be bewildered. However, they didn't accuse you unjustly. Even though you didn't do it personally, it's almost the same. Furthermore, at the Falling Moon Gorge, you were the one who poisoned 2,000 people to death. You should be considered a meritorious deed, the Empress added. Rinpoche looked aggrieved and said, Is it better for me to not leave the palace these few days? You can hide for a while but you can't hide forever. You will have to leave the palace eventually. Therefore, practice your martial arts diligently and have more ability to protect yourself. The Empress frowned. The strength of the people that Great Xia sent to assassinate Rinpoche next time would probably not be the same as the previous 4. This made the Empress somewhat worried. However, there were still many things that Rinpoche needed to do. He couldn't possibly hole himself up in the palace forever, right? Chapter 245. When Rinpoche returned to Earth, he immediately went to bed. These days he was physically and mentally exhausted and traumatized. He had to deal with all sorts of things in the morning, practice martial arts in the afternoon, and rest only in the evening. Every other day he had to be ravaged by a Lolita who had her hair combed into 2 buns to show him why flowers were so red. Finally, he had to face threats from abroad and be on guard against assassinations. He hadn't left the palace for a few days. Sigh. Rinpoche sighed deeply. When would these days come to an end? He lay on the bed for a long time before getting up. There were many missed calls on his phone. Among them, Qin alone had called 10 times. There were also some who he didn't know. Rinpoche thought for a while and felt that there shouldn't be anything going on recently. The last time he came back, the verdict was that it was justified self-defense. After all, he was a law-abiding citizen, and the evidence at the scene had proven everything. Even the jade pendants and some other things had been retrieved. Why was Qin looking for him? After thinking for a while, Rinpoche decided to call Qin. Brother, you are my brother. Can you watch the time before calling next time? Qin was full of resentment. Rinpoche chuckled. I have been so miserable these days, but I only harassed you once. I see that you have made a few calls. What's the matter? Rinpoche asked. There's good news. There's progress in the R-worm research. However, let's talk about the details tomorrow. Qin hung up immediately after he finished speaking. When Rinpoche called again, the other party's phone was turned off. He then threw the phone aside. If he waited for the laboratory to conduct the research, his bones would have turned into ashes by now. However, there were still benefits. After all, there was a result from the research, which meant that the new drug was one step closer to the market. As for the specifics, he still had to see what the results were. This time he brought back some green vines and seeds. These things would probably come in handy very soon. It was said that these green vines grew very fast. They could grow a lot in a few months and could be used in half a year. Rinpoche had personally experienced the effects of this green vine water. It could crush all the hangover medicines on the market. As long as this thing was marketed, he would soon have a source of income. After lying on the bed in a daze for half a day, Rinpoche entered the visualization of water. An hour later he came out of the visualization of water, and immediately fell asleep. When he woke up the next morning, he spaced out for a while before changing his clothes and going downstairs for breakfast. Then he took the ivy to the laboratory. "Lucky boy, you actually came. How rare." Su Shan greeted Rinpoche as soon as she saw him. She lacked the proper respect for this big boss. The main reason was that Rinpoche appeared too infrequently. Furthermore, he wasn't in charge of anything. He was just a big financial backer and a provider of research directions. "Is there any progress with the R-worms?" Rinpoche asked. "Indeed. Follow me." Su Shan brought Rinpoche to her office and took out a pile of documents and photos to explain to him. 10 minutes later, Rinpoche summarized the content that Su Shan had explained to him for a long time. It was a certain substance in the body of a deep-sea organism that contained the antidote that he brought previously. It could suppress the R-worms, and with sufficient dosage, it could be said that it could kill the R-worms. The only problem was that it was harmful to the human body. However, for leukemia patients, this was already a small problem. "How long do you need to complete the research and development of the drug?" Rinpoche asked. 2 years at the earliest, and at least 3 years for it to be on the market. Su Shan gave a rough figure. Rinpoche nodded his head and asked, "How's the black mud cream?" "I'm afraid it will take even longer. The growth of some medicinal herbs is too slow," Su Shan replied. "I brought some good stuff for you." Rinpoche pushed the bag over. Su Shan's eyes lit up when she heard this. One had to know that the first 2 items that Rinpoche brought were new things that no one had discovered before. She didn't expect him to bring out something new again. "You have already become a legend in my heart. I really want to know, where did you get so many good things from?" Su Shan couldn't help but say. She took out the ivy from the bag without any delay. It was as thick as 2 fingers. Although it had been plucked for some time, it was preserved very well. Its entire body was emerald green, and only the edges were a little withered. "What's this?" Su Shan took the ivy and examined it. She couldn't help but ask. "It's called ivy. When this thing is ground into powder, it can cure a hangover. It's better than all the hangover medicines in the market." Su Shan was slightly disappointed after Rinpoche finished speaking. This wasn't what she wanted. "Don't look down on it. Its effect is the same as the black mud cream. It takes effect immediately and is very powerful," Rinpoche said. "I understand. We will start researching on it as soon as possible. According to what you said, this ivy should have a good effect on protecting the liver." Su Shan nodded her head. "The laboratory is already short of manpower. It's best to increase the manpower. I'm not responsible for this. You can report this to the higher-ups." Before Rinpoche could finish his sentence, Su Shan had already picked up her phone and called Papa Chen. She had fully displayed her swift and decisive attitude. After the call was connected, she introduced the things that he brought to Rinpoche and reiterated that they were severely short of manpower. In less than half an hour, Papa Chen rushed over. After exchanging conventional greetings, he asked, "Is this ivy very effective?" Rinpoche repeated what he said earlier, "It's very powerful. I have used it personally and the effect is immediate." Papa Chen immediately laughed. After listening to Rinpoche's words, he could instantly imagine the prospects of this ivy. Even though there were many types of hangover medicine nowadays, most of them had the function of protecting the liver. After drinking it, the effect wasn't that great. However, banquets were indispensable. For a person like him who often had to socialize, he had already suffered a lot. In modern society, there were many people who needed to socialize frequently. Therefore, even though the effect wasn't that great, the market for hangover medicine was still pretty good. If it was as Rinpoche said, the medicine made from this ivy would immediately seize the entire market when it was put on the market. "When the time comes, let's re-sign the contract. This time you have to agree to it." Papa Chen reiterated his previous idea. After all, everything in the laboratory was provided by Rinpoche. Moreover, there were 3 of them. Even though Papa Chen had invested some energy and funds, it was still far from the shares that he currently held. If he didn't want any problems to arise in future collaborations, he had to make things clear. After all, the first time Rinpoche produced the black mud cream, it could be attributed to luck. However, the second and third time couldn't be attributed to luck. If he knew his position, he would be able to reap more benefits in the future. There were gains and losses. He understood this point very well. We'll talk about it when the time comes. Rinpoche didn't seem to care. Seeing him like this, Papa Chen could tell that he was really not interested. He didn't say anything else. Next time he would just prepare the contract for him to sign. At the same time, he was also very curious about what Rinpoche was doing now. After all, he didn't care about money. He also didn't care about managing the laboratory and the pharmaceutical factory. What did he care about? After Rinpoche bade farewell to Papa Chen and left the laboratory, he immediately made a call and went to an office building located a few streets away. There was already a middle-aged man waiting for him downstairs. After greeting him, Rinpoche followed the other party to the 6th floor. There was an area of about 300 square meters for rent. This is the place. It used to be a software company. However, they expanded and moved to a bigger place. The bespectacled middle-aged man introduced the place to Rinpoche. Did they go bankrupt? Rinpoche casually asked. The middle-aged man immediately cried out, "How is that possible? The feng shui here is excellent. Back then we specially got someone to check it out." Rinpoche looked at him sideways. The other party's reaction made him even more suspicious. "You can find out by just asking around," Rinpoche said. The other party immediately felt a chill in his heart. This young man wasn't easy to fool. He immediately shut up and stopped complaining. "Forget it. Anyway, I don't care about what happened to the previous company." Rinpoche told the truth. He was prepared to hire some programmers to create a software that could convert Chinese characters into the language of the other world. When the time comes, he could directly convert the books he wanted into the language of the other world. He was prepared to throw money into this company not to make money. The laboratory and pharmaceutical factory that he worked with Papa Chen were enough to make money. The market for hangover medicine alone was worth 500 million yuan a year. Furthermore, it was the same type of hangover medicine that protected the liver. When the hangover medicine made from green vines hit the market with its powerful effects, not only would it occupy the entire market, but it would also expand the market by several times. It could even be sold overseas. At that time, the market for hangover medicine alone would be more than 1 billion yuan. It could even reach 2 to 3 billion yuan. Together with the other two medicines, the market would be worth at least several billion yuan every year. Furthermore, these medicines would immediately occupy the entire market after they were launched. Therefore, he had no qualms about setting up a company that only spent money and did not make money. 330 square meters, 16,000 yuan a month. Rinpoche immediately signed a 3-year contract with the other party and transferred a year's rent to them. After settling this matter, he went to look for the company that rented the house previously. It was almost time and he was prepared to buy the house this time. 2 days later, the owner of the house became Rinpoche. He could be considered to have his own house in this city, even though it was no longer important to him. However, on this bright and beautiful morning, the image of the Empress sitting on the sofa, eating ice cream and watching television while he made breakfast in the kitchen would forever remain in his memory. Before returning to the other world, Rinpoche still felt a little regretful. Actually, he was prepared to sign up for a mixed martial arts class. He felt that it would be the fastest way to increase his combat power in a short period of time. At least, he would not be trampled on by a little Lolita every day. However, these days he was busy handling the transfer of the house. He also had to find a headhunting company to help him find an assistant. Unfortunately, he was not satisfied with a few of them. Chapter 246. When Rinpoche returned to the other world, he suddenly felt that he had forgotten something. He frowned and pondered for a long time. What exactly did he forget? The next moment he knelt down. "Where's the arrow? Where's the arrow? Where's the arrow?" Rinpoche was dumbfounded. How could he forget the arrow again? Why did he forget the arrow every time he returned to Earth? Could it be that he was born with a bad temper? The heavens are not blessing me. Rinpoche raised his head and sighed bitterly. It was useless to sigh now. He had to think of a way to explain to the Empress or how to make the Empress not pursue this matter. Although the Empress couldn't really chop him, she could definitely do something like kneeling to a glass shard. Perhaps he could change the practice from once every 2 days to once every day? Or perhaps the Empress would personally give him a one-sided beating. What should he do? Rinpoche paced around the room for a long time but couldn't think of any good ideas. Could it be that he had to carry a bramble and beg for forgiveness? Put a bunch of brambles on his back? This wasn't Rinpoche's style. Furthermore, even if he did that, the Empress would most likely sneer and beat him up with the little Lolita. Rinpoche had a pained look on his face. This way he could only resort to his last resort. Get injured and beg for forgiveness. Knife. Is there anything like a fruit knife? Rinpoche searched the room for a long time, but he couldn't find any weapons from Earth. He did find a handgun, a Type 81 rifle, and a grenade. However, these weren't weapons that could be used to get injured and beg for forgiveness. Finally, Rinpoche found a short knife in the room. His eyes immediately lit up, followed by a constipated expression. This knife was given to him by the husband of the pregnant woman he saved at the Chin medicine shop when he taught them how to use the condom to stop bleeding. The problem now was that this knife was too thick. No, it was too wide. Although it was a short knife, it was several times wider than the small knife that Rinpoche imagined. It was wide, thick, and had rust on it. Rinpoche felt that it would be better to let the Empress beat him up with a knife than to use this thing to stab him. However, after thinking about it, he had already forgotten about it a few times. He couldn't possibly forget about it again, right? He also felt guilty in his heart. Forget it, it was better to suffer an injury and beg for forgiveness. The pain was just a matter of a few moves. With the black mud cream, he would be fine again in less than 2 hours. Men had to be tough on themselves. At the thought of this, Rinpoche clenched his teeth, pulled out the dagger, and gestured at his arm for a long time. Then he clenched his teeth and slashed his arm with the dagger. Immediately, a palm-long wound that was half an inch deep appeared, and blood immediately flowed out. Rinpoche was in so much pain that he was gritting his teeth and sweating profusely. Looking at the wound on his arm, Rinpoche decided that he might as well go all the way. He gestured with the knife at his chest and then made another cut. Fortunately, the length of this saber is suitable for my hands. If it were a little longer, I would definitely be blinded. Rinpoche's forehead was covered in cold sweat and his entire body was bathed in blood. Ah! Rinpoche immediately cried out in pain. His eyes were wide open as he stared at the knife in his hand. Now this was no longer a rusty dagger. It was clearly a long dagger, a full meter long. Just now, the knife was clearly only about 30 centimeters long. Just as he was thinking, if it was a little longer, I would be blinded. The knife suddenly became a meter long, and it happened to pierce through his arm. Was this the Rui Jingu saber? Rinpoche's eyes were wide open as this thought emerged in his mind. Following which, he felt a lingering fear. If he had aimed the knife at his chest just now, the Empress would have already collected his corpse. Following which, he felt a sharp pain in his arm. Damn it! Rinpoche clenched his teeth and endured the pain as he pulled out the knife. Blood immediately spurted out. Rinpoche looked at the knife in his hand. After 1 second, he decided to hide the knife first and look for the Empress to save his life. He could study this knife later on. After stuffing the knife under the mattress, Rinpoche's lips trembled as he picked up the walkie-talkie and called the Empress. 10 seconds passed, 20 seconds passed, 1 minute passed. Rinpoche looked at the sky. It was daytime. Why wasn't the Empress's walkie-talkie by her side? I won't die from excessive blood loss, right? When Rinpoche thought of this, he trembled even more. He hurriedly pushed open the door and ran out to look for the Imperial Guards for help. Seeing Deputy Prefect Ren running out to ask for help with his body covered in blood, the Imperial Guards were scared stiff. Everyone knew how much the Empress doted on him. If anything were to happen to him, the consequences would be unimaginable. Your Majesty, I don't know how Deputy Prefect Ren got injured all over his body. I have already asked the doctor to send someone to treat him. In a large hall, the Empress was soaking in a clear pool with her eyes gently closed. At this moment, Hong Wan's voice came from the door. The Empress suddenly opened her eyes. According to the time, Rinpoche should have just returned from Earth, right? Did something happen? In the next moment, her spotlessly white body appeared at the side of the pool. Her white inner garment was like a cloud that enveloped her in the air. Following which, she put on a muslin garment and completely disappeared from the hall. Hong Wan looked at the disappearing figure in the hall and sighed. Her Majesty was a little too concerned about that person. Before that person, when had Her Majesty ever been like this? When the Empress arrived at Pingle Park, the doctor from the clinic had yet to arrive. The Imperial Guards were using a white cloth to clean Rinpoche's wounds. What happened? The Empress frowned and asked. Her entire body was filled with killing intent. Your Majesty, this is a long story. Let's talk about it later when it's convenient. Rinpoche's face was pale and his forehead was full of sweat. Now his wounds were even more painful than before, causing him to shiver. Not long after, the doctor from the clinic came and examined Rinpoche's wounds. The wounds on his chest and arms weren't considered serious. They merely looked scary. However, the wound that went through his chest only injured a little bone. After the doctor treated Rinpoche's wounds and applied the black mud cream to bandage them, he bade farewell and left. After the imperial guards left, Rinpoche spoke while shivering. Previously it was painful. This time it was even more painful and itchy. After all, even though the black mud cream healed wounds quickly, the numbness and itchiness caused by the rapid healing of the wounds was also very fatal. Your Majesty, I was just about to go buy some things after settling some matters. Suddenly 2 people appeared and slashed at me with knives. These 2 people were not like ordinary people. Even though I resisted with all my might, I was still not their match and was injured in a few places. Seeing that the situation was not good, I quickly came back, Rinpoche said. The Empress frowned and said, "Find out who did it. I will exterminate his entire family." "Thank you, Your Majesty. However, I don't know who I have offended. I will have to investigate carefully when I return," Rinpoche quickly said. "I didn't expect such a thing to happen in your world," the Empress said. "Where there are people, there will be underworld. Where there is underworld, there will be disputes. Sometimes you don't even know who you have offended, but the other party will bear a grudge and even attack you. It has been like this since ancient times and has never been severed." Rinpoche's face was filled with vicissitudes of life. The Empress deeply agreed with the saying, "Where there are people, there will be underworld. Where there is underworld, there will be disputes." Currently, Great Xia views you as a thorn in their side. In your world, there are also people who want to make a move on you. It's better for you to practice martial arts properly these few days. I will supervise you. You need to increase your daily practice time by 2 hours, the Empress said after thinking about it. Chapter 247. Your Majesty, I'm still injured. Rinpoche was at a loss. He was still thinking about the knife under the mattress. My wounds have healed. At most, I'll just lose some blood. Or do you want me to spar with you personally? The Empress was so angry that she had a headache. He had never seen someone who disliked martial arts so much. In Dayo, who wouldn't work hard when given such an opportunity. At this moment, there was still a faint scar left on Rinpoche's wound. The effects of the black mud cream could be said to be miraculous. It was just that the wounds were so painful that they made people want to die. Just like that, Rinpoche's 6 hours a day of martial arts practice became 8 hours a day of martial arts practice. Rinpoche felt that he had succeeded in courting death. If he had known earlier, he would have let the Empress do a double team. Rinpoche dragged his exhausted body as if he had just been ravaged by someone. He returned to his room, closed the door and windows and took out the knife from under the mattress. For the entire day, his mind was filled with the Rui Jingu saber. It could be long or short and he did not know if it could be big or small. Did I come across a treasure? Rinpoche had this thought in his mind for the whole day. Once he returned, he hurriedly checked it out. Rinpoche felt that he knew very little about this world. For example, the weapons used by the Aboriginal warriors were all made of ordinary fine iron. He had never heard of any heaven-grade weapons. It just so happened that there was a spirit sword in this world, something that even Newton and Darwin's coffins could not contain. The people in this world knew very little about spiritual swords. Even those sword masters didn't know much about them. At least this was what Ning Kaichen said. It gave Rinpoche the feeling that there were still many unknown things in this world. Even the Empress didn't know much about these things. As a result, even though he was shocked by the Rui Jingu saber, he didn't find it hard to accept. Instead, he wanted to know what kind of treasure it was. At this point in time, the saber in Rinpoche's hand had reverted to its original form of a short saber. It was no longer more than a foot long. What happened in the morning seemed like an illusion. Rinpoche held the hilt of the saber in his hand and pointed it upwards. Long, grow longer. Big, grow bigger. Rinpoche struggled for a long time, but the dagger in his hand did not react at all. If it wasn't for the knife that pierced his arm in the morning, he would have thought that it was an illusion. Thinking about it, the only difference between this time and this morning was that there was blood in the morning but now there was none. Could it be that this thing could recognize its owner with blood? But he had dripped blood in the morning. Rinpoche thought about it and felt that this was the only possibility. He wasn't willing to give it a try. He clenched his teeth and cut his arm again. Then, he allowed the fresh blood from his arm to drip onto the blade of the saber while he carefully observed the changes in the saber. Grow longer. With a thought from Renbachien, the blade suddenly elongated from 1 foot to 2 feet. Moreover, the appearance of the saber had also changed a little. The originally somewhat blunt front end had become sharper. Grow longer. Renbachien continued to mutter. In the morning, the saber was 1 meter long, which was 3 feet long. Now it was still 1 foot short. As the fresh blood continued to drip onto the blade, the Rui Jingu saber grew another 10 centimeters after much effort. The blood that had flowed onto the saber did not spill out at all. Instead, it began to fade and eventually disappeared into the saber, as if it had been absorbed by the saber. This thing doesn't recognize its owner by dripping blood. Does it suck blood? Renbachien suddenly realized this problem. Moreover, it seems like the more blood it sucks, the longer it grows? Or does it change according to its will? Widen. Grow bigger. Renbachien experimented for a long time and finally confirmed that the saber had indeed grown longer, but its width and thickness remained the same. Renbachien frowned. He first wiped his wound with a cloth and applied the black mud cream. This was the leftover from the morning that the doctor didn't take away. He had already lost a lot of blood in the morning. If he continued to bleed, he reckoned that he would really die from excessive blood loss. After treating the wound, Renbachien held the saber and muttered, "Grow." The saber changed back to its original shape. Grow. This time the saber still grew longer, but it was only half a meter long. It seems that the blood that this thing sucks will be consumed, or rather, it will decrease over time. Therefore, when I came back and tried to make the saber change, there was no reaction. This is considered a good thing, right? Renbachien held the hilt of the saber and sized it up carefully. Just from its appearance, this saber didn't look outstanding. However, just from the fact that it could grow and shrink, one could tell that it wasn't an ordinary item. This isn't a spirit sword, right? Renbachien thought about Ning Tsaichen's spirit sword and what he said. It shouldn't be. The spirit sword had its own sword spirit, and when wielding the spirit sword, it could greatly increase the strength of the sword master, although the price was the consumption of the sword master's life force. However, this knife did not react at all when he held it. Instead, it sucked blood and grew shorter and longer. This did not match Ning Tsaichen's description of the spiritual sword. From the looks of it, it was another kind of treasure. In any case, this saber should be considered a good thing. Renbachien's first thought was to give it to the empress. After thinking about it carefully, he could only give it to the empress. Otherwise, it wouldn't be of much use in his hands unless he sent it to the laboratory. However, he really didn't dare to send this kind of thing to the laboratory. Something big would definitely happen. At the thought of this, Renbachien felt somewhat happy. After all, he still didn't know how much he admired the empress in his heart. Was it 60%, 70%, 80%, 90%, or even 10%? However, he was sure that he liked her very much and that she was extremely important to him. Renbachien didn't feel reluctant to give this treasure to her. Instead, he was very happy. However, just as he stood up, he hesitated and felt that it would be better to wait for a few days. If he gave it to her now, his previous injuries might be exposed. Just like that, 3 days later, Renbachien took the short saber to Yangxin Palace Hall. "Your Majesty, I found a treasure." The empress straightened her body and was slightly curious. Renbachien had been in the palace for the past few days. How could he obtain a treasure? The short saber. Renbachien looked like he was presenting a treasure. He handed the short saber to the empress and was prepared to keep her in suspense. In a while, he would show the empress how long this saber could grow and shrink. The empress took the short saber from Renbachien's hand. It was wrapped in an ordinary leather scabbard and the handle was also wrapped in a layer of animal skin. It didn't look precious at all. Renbachien casually took the short saber out of the scabbard. It was only about a foot long, slightly thick, and the front was blunt. The body of the saber didn't look sharp and even had a few rice grain-sized nicks. Renbachien had a proud look on his face. This saber definitely didn't look any different from the outside. It was just an ordinary, slightly worn-out short saber. He had it for so long. If he hadn't been injured that day, he wouldn't have discovered it. The empress initially thought that Renbachien had really found a treasure. However, upon closer inspection, it was indeed an ordinary short saber. She couldn't help but raise her head and look at Renbachien. "Your Majesty, this short saber is indeed a treasure. Previously, I taught a set of hemostasis techniques at the Chen family's medicine shop and saved a pregnant woman. The pregnant woman's husband gave this saber to me as a token of gratitude. At first, I thought it was just an ordinary short saber. I didn't expect to find out that there was a secret hidden within it this morning. Rinpoche told the Empress about the origin of this saber as if he was narrating a story. As the Empress listened, she caressed the body of the saber and flicked it with her finger. Clang, clang. Rinpoche's eyes widened all of a sudden. His mouth, which was originally talking incessantly, couldn't even utter a single word. It broke. It broke. It actually broke. He saw that with that flick of the Empress's finger, the body of the saber immediately became shorter. The tip of the saber drew an arc and fell to the ground. The Empress looked at the broken edge of the saber. It wasn't hollow and there wasn't anything hidden inside. She raised her head and looked at him doubtfully. Chapter 248. Rinpoche held the broken saber in one hand and the tip of the saber in the other. He cursed inwardly. What happened to this precious saber? It broke with a flick of the saber? It was broken by the Empress's saber at a spot 5 centimeters inwards. Could it be glued with all-purpose glue? Or should it be melted down and reforged? What's the secret? The Empress looked curious. She sprinkled salt and cumin on the wound in Rinpoche's heart. Your Majesty, this was originally a precious saber. Now it's broken. Rinpoche's heart ached. A precious saber? I couldn't tell, the Empress replied non-committally. Sigh. Rinpoche sighed. His mind was filled with thoughts on how to reattach the saber and whether it could still be used. He said helplessly, I accidentally discovered that this saber can change its length with my thoughts after being stained with blood. I thought it was a treasure and came to gift it to your Majesty. I didn't expect it to break. Change its length? The Empress found Rinpoche's words strange, but she didn't find anything special about this saber. At least it can change its length, but I don't know if it can still be used. Rinpoche pondered and cut his arm with the saber. Blood flowed directly onto the saber. The first time he cut himself, he was still afraid of pain and clenched his teeth for a long time. The second and third time he cut himself, even though he was still afraid of pain, he didn't hesitate anymore. Now that he had cut himself, Rinpoche felt that it didn't matter anymore. He didn't show any mercy and didn't even frown. He didn't even realize that he had awakened some strange attribute. The Empress frowned slightly when she saw Rinpoche's actions. She then focused on the saber in his hand. Grow, grow, grow. Following Rinpoche's thoughts, the saber gradually elongated in the Empress's eyes, from less than 1 foot to 2 feet long. The Empress exclaimed softly. Was actually true. However, even though the saber was elongated, the front end was still broken. Rinpoche held the broken saber and thought that since it could change its length, it definitely wasn't an ordinary saber. Now that there was still blood on it, he wanted to see if the tip of the saber could reattach itself. If it was an ordinary saber, it definitely wouldn't work. However, Rinpoche still had some expectations for this saber. Rinpoche connected the blades together. As the blood was gradually absorbed by the blade, the crack at the joint gradually shrank until it was as thick as a strand of hair. Although there was still a crack, when he released one of his hands, the entire blade was connected together and didn't fall off. Success. Rinpoche was overjoyed at the unexpected good news. He thought that this treasured saber would die before it could be used. Unexpectedly, it could be retrieved by itself. It was indeed a treasured saber. Rinpoche hurriedly sprinkled some more blood on the saber. The hair-thin crack gradually faded and finally disappeared. The saber became the same as before, but the gap on the blade was still there. Your Majesty, it's indeed a treasured saber. You actually managed to retrieve it. Rinpoche happily handed the saber to the Empress with both hands. At this moment, the Empress was also somewhat interested. She took the saber and examined it carefully. At this moment, the saber was 2.5 feet long. The original rust on it had also disappeared. There was a cold gleam on the blade. The only flaw was that there were a few rice grain-sized gaps on the blade. Just now, she personally saw the saber grow from 1 foot to 2.5 feet. She also personally saw the tip of the saber being reattached. Naturally, she knew that this saber was indeed not an ordinary saber. She tapped the tip of the saber on her fingertip. A white dot appeared on her fingertip. Then she used the saber to cut her palm. A white line appeared on her palm and disappeared in a flash. Your Majesty. Rinpoche was first shocked by the Empress's actions. Soon after, he was speechless. Even though this saber couldn't cut through iron like mud, it couldn't be considered blunt either. When he cut his body, his flesh was split open. Yet, when it cut the Empress's skin, it actually only left a white line. It couldn't even penetrate her defense. He grabbed the Empress's wrist and felt the temperature of her palm. Her skin was exquisite and smooth. It seemed to be no different from that of an ordinary girl. At most, her skin was a little better. It was really hard to imagine that the Empress's skin could actually only leave a white line after being cut by a saber. She was so powerful that she simply didn't seem like a human. The Empress used her strength to cut her palm again. However, the white line only lasted for a little longer. After that, it slowly returned to its original state. 2 fair fingers cut the saber's body. Pah! A soft sound was heard. Clang! More than half of the saber's body fell to the ground. Rinpoche, treasure saber, you died so miserably. Its sharpness and hardness are ordinary. Other than being able to lengthen and shorten, it's no different from an ordinary saber. Keep it for fun, the Empress said indifferently. Even though it was somewhat novel, the Empress lost interest in this saber after trying it out. Rinpoche looked at the saber that had fallen to the ground and was somewhat speechless. Treasure saber, you are really too disappointing. You broke it with just a touch. Are you here to extort money? To think that he thought that he had obtained a treasure previously. At present it could indeed be considered a treasure. However, other than using it for fun, it didn't seem to have much use. If this saber was used as a weapon, it wouldn't immediately break after a single slash. Rinpoche picked up the saber. He thought that since the Empress didn't want it, he would bring it back to Earth to study it. He wanted to know what exactly was going on with this saber. Your Majesty, do you want to play a game? Rinpoche suggested excitedly when he saw that the Empress was bored to death in the palace. What is it? The Empress asked casually. She wasn't too interested in it. Keof. Rinpoche took out the bag that contained the laptop previously. There were 2 game controllers inside. He had prepared these the previous time as he thought that if the Empress was bored in the palace, she could also play some games. Your Majesty, this should be done like this, like this, like this. Rinpoche sat side by side with the Empress and taught her how to operate the game controllers. Seeing the small figure that appeared on the laptop screen, the Empress finally became a little more energetic and began to focus her attention. 1 hour later, perfect. A sound was emitted from the laptop. Pah! The game controller in the Empress's hand turned into a pile of fragments and fell to the ground. Boring. The Empress's pretty face was almost raised to the sky with a look of disdain. As she loosened her grip, all the fragments in her hand fell to the ground. Rinpoche didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Your Majesty, aren't you too much of a sore loser? The last time they played checkers, she smashed the checkers into powder with 1 slap. This time she also smashed the game controller into pieces. Next time it would be better to play Contra. He didn't know if the character would directly smash the laptop into pieces after death. Looking at the Empress's past 2 times, it wasn't impossible. It was full of dark history. Fortunately, the Empress didn't smash the laptop this time. Both of them could still watch a movie. After lunch, it was time for Rinpoche to practice martial arts. Just as he was about to pack his things, his gaze fell on the treasure saber that he had just broken. Suddenly he discovered something that made him dumbfounded. The end of that short saber was only about 10 centimeters long and was slightly shorter than before. And the part that was broken was still the same length as when it was first broken. It was about a foot long. Your Majesty, look. Rinpoche was shocked as he picked up the broken saber. For a moment, his mind was filled with a magical melody. I have a beautiful wish when I grow up. I can sow the sun so 1 by 1 is enough, will bear many many suns, 1 for the South Pole, 1 for the Arctic Ocean, 1 to hang in the winter, 1 to hang at night, la la la, plant the sun, la 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 la, plant the sun, la 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 la, plant the sun. The magical melody kept reverberating in Rinpoche's mind. All he had to do was to replace the word sun with treasure saber. If the broken part wouldn't shorten, would he be able to grow this saber by watering it with blood? As long as he watered it with blood, it would lengthen and then be cut off. Rinpoche was shocked. This was simply a magical weapon. Why would he still need to mine iron? He just had to plant the saber. Chapter 249. After a day of training, Rinpoche dragged his exhausted body back to Pingle Park with his treasure saber. I should give you a name. Rinpoche pondered for a while. Ruijingu Saber? Should I call it Longevity Saber? Rinpoche grinned. This name wasn't bad. It could grow and change. Let's call it the Elongation Saber. Rinpoche felt that he needed a physics laboratory. This knife definitely couldn't be sent to a pharmaceutical laboratory. It was a pity that he had no money now. He could forget about the physics laboratory. It was not something that he could build with just 20 million yuan. Even if he could, he was not prepared to spend all his money. For the time being, he only needed to know how to use the knife. When he had the money, he would consider researching the knife. The next morning, Ren Baqin excitedly went to the imperial kitchen to look for caretaker Go. Then he went to the lower hall. The imperial kitchen was divided into two parts. The first part was the upper hall where the empress usually ate. Now his meals were also prepared here. The other part was the lower hall, which was responsible for the meals of the maids, female officials, and guards. Every day the palace needed to slaughter the livestock there. When they arrived, they saw two giant goats, a wild boar, and a scimitar-horned cow ready to be slaughtered. In this world, the wild boar was called a black-faced gentleman, while the scimitar-horned cow was similar to a water buffalo. It was smaller than the fork-horned cow and wasn't as good at running as the fork-horned cow. Use this knife to kill. Ren Baqin passed the broken knife to the person who was preparing to kill the livestock. The other party had a look of, "Are you kidding me?" This saber didn't even have a sharp point, and it was so short. In the end, Ren Baqin used a knife that was specially used for slaughtering livestock and soaked the broken knife in a basin of blood. The blood of the 4 animals was sucked clean by it in 2 hours, causing the surrounding people to be shocked. In the past, the blood of a single animal could fill a large basin, but now it was all gone. Ren Baqin did not explain anything. He carried the saber and returned to Pingle Park. As he thought, grow, 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 the saber grew from half a foot to 6 feet, which was 2 meters long. Ren Baqin held the long saber and pointed it upwards. Suddenly he felt that he was like Sephiroth, only lacking a head of elegant long hair and a leather windbreaker. Needless to say, this saber looked a bit thick when it was a short saber, but when it became a long saber, it looked a bit like a Zamadeo. However, Ren Baqin also discovered a problem this time. This saber had absorbed the blood of 4 animals, and its length wasn't satisfactory. One had to know that the blood he spilled back then had caused it to grow 3 feet long. However, if he released all the blood from the 4 animals, he would only be able to absorb 6 feet of blood. If that was the case, the effect wouldn't be as great as he thought. Could it be that only human blood was effective? Could it be that only his blood was effective? At the thought of this, Ren Baqin was shocked. After thinking about it carefully, this saber was indeed of little use. After slaughtering 4 animals in the palace every day, it was only 6 feet long. At the very least, he had to keep 1 foot of it for future use. As for a 5 feet long saber, Ren Baqin weighed it in his hand and found that it weighed about 5 caddies. Over 1,500 caddies of iron a year was better than nothing. Unless they were sent to a slaughterhouse, but there were no slaughterhouses in this world. They were all slaughtered privately. Were they going to build a processing plant outside the city? If he really wanted to unleash the power of the longevity saber, this was the only way. Another question was that if the saber was not broken, it would shorten after a period of time. He did not know the reason. Was it really because the blood absorbed by the saber disappeared with the passage of time? Or did it actually increase other aspects of the blade? For example, hardness. Ren Baqin felt that he could give it a try. After shortening the saber, it became half a foot long again. Its weight was also reduced. It was about the same weight as when the saber was broken. It was simply amazing. It did not conform to the law of conservation of mass at all. However, the saber seemed to be slightly longer than before it absorbed the blood. Ren Baqin used his fingers to measure it. It seemed that it was indeed longer by about 1 centimeter. It seemed that as the saber absorbed the blood, it could grow back even if it was not reattached. However, he did not know if it would suffer from kidney deficiency if it kept growing and then continuously being broken. After experimenting for a while, Ren Baqin carefully put the saber away and received news that the bricks were ready. Her Majesty summoned him to Yangshin Palace Hall. When Ren Baqin arrived at Yangshin Palace Hall, there were already 2 people standing there. One was Tong Jinye, and the other was someone he had never seen before. He only found out later that he was a junior minister from the Department of Works. Bricks and cement were initially handled by the Department of Ordnance. After all, Jingtian furnaces were also managed by the Department of Ordnance. Now the firing of cement and clay bricks was transferred to the Department of Works. In front of Tong Jinye there were a few pieces of street fighting equipment. Bricks? Deputy Prefect Ren, do you think this is the right one? Tong Jinye asked after Ren Baqin greeted him. Ren Baqin raised his head and looked at the Empress before looking at the bricks with a face full of joy. They felt good to the touch, had a smooth surface and were very heavy. They weren't as rough as modern red bricks. This was because coal ash wasn't added into the bricks. Even though firing them this way was more troublesome, the quality was the best and wouldn't deteriorate after hundreds of years. After smashing the bricks into pieces, they saw that the interior was very dense, unlike the black interior of the red bricks that had coal ash added. After Rinpoche examined them carefully, he laughed and said, "That's it. This method of firing bricks and building with cement is much easier than mining and polishing rocks." The others nodded their heads. This was indeed the case. "Let's do it this way then. The Ministry of Works will seize the time to fire these bricks and cement to build the glass factory. If there's anything you don't understand, look for Deputy Prefect Ren." The Empress nodded her head. Everyone obeyed the order. Rinpoche returned to Pingal Park again, took out the blueprint of the earthen kiln and handed it to Tong Jinya. The current earthen kiln firing speed was too slow and there were too few of them. If Dayo didn't completely rely on wood to fire, Rinpoche would have preferred to build a rotary kiln. This way the speed of firing bricks and cement would be greatly increased. It's best to place the earthen kiln a little further away. It's a good place to get the clay from, Rinpoche exhorted. Why? Tong Jinya asked curiously. Transporting clay was much easier than transporting bricks. In that case, most of the craftsmen would have to live there. The transportation of food and other supplies would also require more manpower. In that case, the consumption of supplies and manpower would be much higher. Otherwise, after a few years, when a large amount of burnt debris floats in the air, you won't even be able to see the stars when you look up. Rinpoche spread his hands and said. He was just short of saying that it was everyone's responsibility to protect the environment and leave a piece of azure sky for future generations. He didn't want to wake up every day in the next 10 or 20 years to be surrounded by a haze like a fairyland. However, it was still very difficult for Tong Jinya to understand. After all, the people in this world had never seen what was called air pollution. "Do as Deputy Prefect Rin said," the Empress said decisively. In this aspect, Rinpoche was much more knowledgeable than them. Only then did Tong Jinya nod his head in agreement. Following which, Tong Jinya looked at Rinpoche with an extremely strange gaze, which made Rinpoche's hair stand on end. "What's wrong?" Rinpoche didn't understand. "I heard a little about Deputy Prefect Ren from Tong Lan. Deputy Prefect Ren's shamelessness is similar to my demeanor in the past." Tong Jinya stroked his beard with a look of admiration on his face. However, even a fool could see that his eyes were filled with contempt. A few days ago, Her Majesty summoned Tong Lan to the palace as a sparring partner. Tong Jinya didn't think much of it. Even though Tong Lan was young, it wasn't a problem for her to fight 3 to 5 Rinpoche with one hand. However, when he was having a meal at the Tong residence, he casually asked about it. After hearing about what happened in the afternoon, he immediately spurted out his food. Not to mention him, even the rest of the people in the Tong residence were shocked. How could he be so shameless in front of the Empress and a 10-year-old child? Not only did he dare to mention brothels, he even threatened them with words like not returning the money. This was simply an eye-opener. Chapter 250. I'll go back with you. I've said before that I'll exterminate the entire family of those who attacked you previously, the Empress said to Rinpoche with an indifferent look on her face. Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat. The last time he came back, he was covered in blood and asked for forgiveness. He said that he was attacked on the road. In the past, he seemed to have told the Empress that he could only teleport to a fixed location. Furthermore, the few times he teleported with the Empress proved that this was true. As long as he brought the Empress back to Earth, he was afraid that he would immediately be exposed. "Your Majesty, when I return this time, I want to find out who the mastermind is. Will be very boring. I can't let Your Majesty accompany me to search for clues. Why don't you go with me after I find out who it is, Your Majesty?" Rinpoche didn't panic at all as he smiled and spoke softly. "What should we do if we encounter danger this time? With your skills, you can't even defeat a child." The Empress looked at him and asked. There was a tinge of concern in her voice as she conveniently stabbed a knife into Rinpoche's heart. "I will be careful when I return this time. Moreover, I have to go through tempering. A flower in a greenhouse cannot withstand the wind and rain. The strength of ordinary people on Earth is worlds apart from that of the Aboriginals. If I can't deal with them, then I'm really useless," Rinpoche explained. "Besides, I still have a gun. I didn't bring it with me last time, but I won't forget this time." As for the spear, the Empress was non-committal. It was like a toy to her. However, it did have a certain effect on ordinary people. "Since you insist, we'll do as you say. Be careful," the Empress said with a hint of concern. Zhixiao, I will be careful. After 2.5 days I will be able to come back at any time. There won't be any danger. Ren Baqin nodded with a gentle smile. In the palace he rarely called the Empress by her name. At this moment, directly calling her by her name seemed rather intimate. After returning to Pingle Park, Ren Baqin heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately she didn't insist. Otherwise something big would have happened. However, even though she didn't insist, he felt guilty when he thought about how she treated him. This caused a guilty look to appear on his face. It was better not to lie to her next time. Getting injured and asking for forgiveness once was enough. If you walk too much at night, you will inevitably run into ghosts and a general will inevitably die in battle. He remembered that he used to be a famous, honest and cute young man, but now it seemed that lying had almost become an instinct. Sigh life. Ren Baqin sighed slightly and took out the pistol from the house. He was lying to the Empress and there wasn't any danger. Naturally, there was no need for him to bring a pistol with him. On Earth, having a pistol in one's hand would be troublesome. He changed his clothes and looked at the gun on the bed. In the end, he stuffed it into his waist pocket. The next moment he disappeared. That kid is really hard to find. Let's wait a little longer. If he still doesn't come back, Ren Baqin heard this voice as soon as he returned to Earth. Looking in the direction of the voice, he saw a tall and skinny man with glasses sitting on the sofa. Apart from him, there were 2 other men standing beside him, all of them exuding a tough aura. At this moment, the 3 of them were staring at Ren Baqin. It was obvious that they were stunned by his sudden appearance. Ren Baqin was also dumbfounded. He looked around and realized that this was his house. But where did these 3 people come from? *CK, could it be such a coincidence? Something big had happened. I didn't expect it, I really didn't expect it, it really surprised me. After the man sitting on the sofa calmed down, he immediately clapped and laughed. He let out a series of sighs and his face was filled with a mixture of shock and surprise. Want to chat for a while? That man stretched out his hand and made a gesture. Even though he sounded like he was asking, he didn't have the slightest intention of asking. Ren Baqin's mind was filled with questions. He also wanted to know who these people were and what they were here for. However, there was one thing he was sure of, something big had really happened. Ren Baqin calmed himself down, restrained the shocked expression on his face, and put on a tranquil look. How do I address you? Ren Baqin stood at the same spot without moving. The 2 men immediately stretched out their hands to grab Ren Baqin's shoulders. Ren Baqin's body moved in an instant. He shifted his elbow upwards and stamped his right foot on the other man's foot. Following which, he lifted his crotch with a kick. That man didn't even have the chance to groan before he fell to the ground while holding onto his crotch. Upon seeing this, the other man glared at Ren Baqin. Ren Baqin's figure shifted to the side. Following which, he used the matchless vanguard and used both of his hands to smash his opponent's chest. His opponent immediately flew backward and smashed the coffee table into pieces. Ren Baqin had made some progress in his martial arts training these days. In addition, his strength had also increased a lot. Now, he could already weigh 220 kilograms. His speed was also slightly faster than an ordinary person, so he could easily take down these 2 men. Your skills are not bad. The bespectacled middle-aged man wasn't the slightest bit surprised by the change in the situation. Instead, he applauded and praised Ren Baqin. He then added, but you better behave now. I don't really like people touching me. Now we can chat. Ren Baqin leaned against the wall and asked, who are you? Who I am isn't important, but there's no harm in telling you. My name is Jin Jun, Jin as in gold, and Jun as in gentleman. Jin Jun said fearlessly. What are you doing here? Originally, it was because of some other matters. Jin Jun picked up a stack of white paper that was scattered on the ground after the coffee table was smashed. I'm very interested in the shares that you have in this laboratory. Although I don't know how you did it, you actually made Qinyan withdraw his business in other areas to invest in this laboratory. You are actually the biggest shareholder. Jin Jun put the stack of paper aside. What do you know? Ren Baqin frowned. That stack of paper seemed to be the contract between him and Papa Chen. It was previously placed in the bedroom, but it seemed like they had dug it out. He wasn't surprised that he was exposed. The shareholders of the laboratory could be checked through the Industrial and Commercial Bureau. Although it was a little difficult for ordinary people, it was easy for those with some status and connections. However, he didn't expect that before there were any results from the laboratory, someone would target him directly. Was this person crazy? Did he think that he was overseas and dared to do anything? Why didn't he look for Papa Ma? Or was he just so unscrupulous to this extent? From the current situation, it was very obvious that the other party was so unscrupulous and treated him as a soft persimmon. Of course, in the eyes of outsiders, he was indeed a soft persimmon. A year ago he was still an ordinary person. He didn't know how he got lucky and cooperated with Papa Chin. Furthermore, he even owned the majority of the shares. According to what he said, Papa Chin had withdrawn his business in other areas and focused his attention on the laboratory. This would definitely attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. Then they found him. After all, in their eyes he was just an ordinary person. Now, he only had a piece of paper in his hands and didn't have any influence in society. It was very easy to deal with him. As long as they could take him down, they wouldn't need to pay a huge price to have a stake in the laboratory. After that, they could settle Papa Chin. If the other party had a grudge against Papa Chin, they could simply ruin the project that Papa Chin had invested a lot of money and energy into. Or they could use some methods to distract Papa Chin's attention and defeat him in other areas. Business has its own way of doing things. The other party's methods were obviously despicable. Ren Bachin suddenly recalled something. Previously he was stabbed in the bar. Later on, he heard from Chin Ching that the other party had a business dispute with Papa Chin. The other party's target was Chin Ching. In the end he was innocently stabbed. The same despicable method. Could it be this Jin Jun? Or could it be the person behind Jin Jun? Chapter 251. Were you the ones who stabbed me the last time? Ren Bachin asked curiously. Jin Jun looked at Ren Bachin carefully. He was very calm and didn't look flustered at all. It seemed that he was confident. Unfortunately, he was confident too. Neither side was in a hurry. You can't talk nonsense like that. We are serious businessmen. Jin Jun smiled faintly. Serious businessmen? Ren Bachin laughed. It seemed that it was indeed the other party. Furthermore, the other party said, we. It seemed that he was representing someone else. Otherwise, he would have said I instead of we. Ren Bachin, born in 1993, graduated from SY University 2 years ago, lives in Jinshin Garden in T-City, has parents and a younger brother. You see, we know a lot about you, so we're not afraid of you running away or doing something desperate. You can't run away today. Even if you do, you can't run away from the temple. Now, let's talk about something I'm interested in. For example, how did you suddenly appear? I'm more interested in this now. Jin Jun spread out his hands. He felt that he had discovered a big secret, which made him a little excited. From Ren Bachin's past, he was just an ordinary person. Therefore, Jin Jun had nothing to worry about. He didn't even bring any weapons when he came. There was no need and it would cause trouble. What was there to worry about? Would the other party dare to do anything to the three of them? Not to mention his family, even if he was given a knife, would he dare to kill the three of them? Furthermore, could he kill them? From Ren Bachin's past, he was as clean and weak as a lamb. But now he had changed his opinion. He didn't know when this kid learned some martial arts. But he wasn't too worried. Would the other party dare to do anything? Ren Bachin was silent for a while. After hearing what the other party said, his mood immediately turned sour. Although he knew that the other party was a despicable person, no one would be in a good mood when their family was threatened. He looked at the two thugs. One of them was still holding his crotch and rolling on the ground, unable to get up. The other one got up from the ground and looked at him fiercely. People change, Yizichin said. Ren Bachin sighed. He didn't need to explain the rest of the matter. He only needed to know a few points. First, the other party wasn't just these few people. There might be someone else behind them. Secondly, the other party had actually come for the laboratory that he was collaborating with Papa Chin. He could be considered unlucky. Upon hearing Ren Bachin's sigh, Jin Jun felt that something was amiss. Before he could react, Ren Bachin had already pointed the pistol at him and pulled the trigger. Fortunately, there was a silencer. After a few soft sounds, Jin Jun lay on the sofa with a shocked and puzzled expression. After that, the thug who had a fierce look on his face collapsed with a few bloody holes on his body. Ren Bachin lowered his head and looked at the man who was immersed in deep pain. Then he extended his leg and stepped on his neck. The Empress always liked to do this and it seemed very refreshing. Suddenly he wanted to give it a try. He did not expect the other party to grab his calf and try to throw him down. Unfortunately, the other party did not have much strength left. Ren Bachin felt a little regretful as he shot him in the head. Unlike hitting his body, the back of his head directly exploded. It was very disgusting. Ren Bachin walked to Jin Jun's side, straightened his body and sat down beside him. Jin Jun was not dead yet, but he could not say anything. Blood was foaming from his mouth, and his eyes were filled with the fear of death. Surprised, aren't you? Ren Bachin put his hand on Jin Jun's shoulder. He saw that the other thug was still twitching and seemed to be alive. He raised his hand to shoot him again, and the other party immediately stopped moving. Actually, I am more surprised than you, Ren Bachin said unhurriedly with a sad look on his face. In any case, this is my home. Do you think this is the city gate when you come in and out? Tell me, who did I offend? Nothing good happens every day. It was not easy for me to return home, and I still have to bump into all of you. Don't you think I'm unlucky? Every day this person thinks about me, that person thinks about me, Great Xia thinks about me, and all of you think about me. Ren Bachin rambled on. Jin Jun exhaled his last breath and collapsed weakly on Ren Bachin's shoulder. Until the moment of his death, he was listening to Ren Bachin's long-winded nonsense. His heart was filled with despair. Sai, it's not easy to find someone to talk to. Why don't you wait for me to finish? Ren Bachin turned his head to look at Jin Jun and felt wronged. There weren't many opportunities to talk to people, and there were too many things that he couldn't say. It wasn't easy to find someone to talk to, and Jin Jun should have held on a little longer. Sigh. Ren Bachin sighed deeply and pushed Jin Jun aside. What should he do now? It would be easy if it was the last day. He could just clean up the scene and bring the corpses to the other world. However, he had just returned and there were still 2.5 days left. In less than a day, the other party would probably come looking for him if they couldn't contact Jin Jun. Ren Bachin didn't think that Jin Jun's whereabouts weren't known. Therefore, he definitely couldn't leave the corpses here. However, there was a high risk of being discovered if he wanted to bring the 3 corpses downstairs and load them into the car. Only God knew if the other party only had 3 people. What if they left a driver downstairs? If he went downstairs, he would be discovered immediately. When the other party called Jin Jun and realized that he couldn't contact the 3 people, he was afraid that something would happen immediately. He might really have to flee for his life this time. How unlucky. Ren Bachin felt really wronged. Who did he offend? He went upstairs and walked around. Sure enough, the bedroom had been turned upside down. He packed some of his things and was ready to escape at any time. Then he went to the Empress's room. There were many clothes that he bought for the Empress that filled the entire wardrobe. Unfortunately, he couldn't take them away. She wouldn't be unhappy, would she? Forget it, he would just buy more next time. He took out his phone and sent a video call home. His mother picked up after 2 rings. You are getting younger and younger. Ren Bachin smiled and didn't seem like he was preparing to flee for his life. You are finally willing to call home? When are you coming back? And that girl from last time? Ren Bachin's mother couldn't forget her. I'm going out for a while when I have time. I will go back after I return. It will be a few hours' journey. I only see you a few times a year. I have almost forgotten that I have a son like you. Ren Bachin chatted with his mother for 10 minutes before hanging up the phone with some regret. He hoped that he could get through this smoothly. Otherwise, it would be a long time before he could return home. Originally, his younger brother, Ren Wanyin, had gotten into a good university. His family was going to hold a graduation banquet and he was preparing to go back. Now it was all ruined. In the end, it was all because of those unlucky people outside. Hello, Qingqing, do you know someone called Jin Jun? Ren Bachin called Qingqing again. Why did you ask about him? Where did you meet him? Did he create trouble for you? Qingqing immediately asked after hearing Ren Bachin's question. What's his background? Tell me in detail. Following Qingqing's explanation, Ren Bachin finally knew about Jin Jun's background. Just as Ren Bachin thought, Jin Jun didn't get along with Papa Qin and was considered a business rival. Among them, Jin Wen, Jin Wu, and then Jin Jun were his 2 elder brothers. Among them, Jin Wen was the leader, followed by Jin Wu. Jin Jun was the last but also the boldest one. The Jin family's influence wasn't small in this city. They were very underhanded and had a group of people under them. The previous bar incident was done by them. However, they rarely let others gossip about them. There were many henchmen who took the blame. Under the protection of these henchmen, Papa Qin couldn't do anything to them. After hearing Qingqing's words, Ren Bachin said, I have some matters to attend to recently. Help me look after my family and be careful of the Jin family. How did you become enemies with them? Is there anything I can help you with? Qingqing immediately asked. Ren Bachin hung up the phone. There was really no one who could help him with his current situation. After walking around the house, he first found some transparent tape and stuck it on the gunshot holes on their bodies. He wanted to see if it could stop the bleeding. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to clean up the bleeding if it kept on bleeding. It was still alright. It was somewhat effective. After wrapping the wounds with a bedsheet, the blood finally stopped flowing out. It was just that the guy who was shot in the back of his head looked like a sakama. It was too disgusting. After pulling the three of them together, Rinpoche started to mop the floor. However, some blood had seeped into the cracks of the floorboards, so he could only mop the floor. After cleaning up, he looked at the gunshot hole on the floor and regretted shooting too quickly. Now there was a gunshot hole on the floor and he couldn't clean it up even if he wanted to. He continued to look for pliers and dug out the bullet inside. However, there was a hole in the floorboards. After that, he found 2 more bullet holes on the sofa. Fortunately, the sofa was made of leather. Although it was stained with blood, it was still easy to clean up. If I had known earlier, I would have brought my elongation saber back. The other party is just a bunch of noobs. My 40-meter-long saber will give them a head start of 39 meters, Rinpoche muttered as he flipped the sofa to look for bullets. An electronic ringtone sounded. Rinpoche found the phone on Jin Jun's body. When he saw the words Xiao Hui written on it, he answered the call. Brother Jun, Brother Wen is still waiting for you. When are you leaving? Upon hearing this, Rinpoche immediately knew that it was most likely the driver waiting downstairs. Moreover, Brother Wen was Jin Wen, right? It seemed like he couldn't hide it for long. Cough cough. Rinpoche coughed violently and spat. He pretended that his throat was uncomfortable and tried his best to imitate Jin Jun's voice. Come up. His voice was a little different. Rinpoche hoped that the other party would think that his throat was uncomfortable, which was why his voice had changed. Brother Jun, is your throat uncomfortable? I'm coming, the person on the other side of the phone said. Rinpoche hung up the phone to vent his anger. It seemed like he could hide it for a while longer. Rinpoche first dragged the 3 corpses to a corner, then sat on the sofa and waited for the other party to come in. Brother Jun? After a while, a person's voice came from the door. Soon after, the door was pulled open. The other party wasn't very prepared. As soon as the person came in, he saw a handsome but blood-stained young man pointing a pistol at him. Before he could shout out, Rinpoche pulled the trigger. After closing the door, Rinpoche turned to look inside the house and sighed. Although the place had been cleaned up, there were still bloodstains in the corners of the walls and the cracks in the floor. There were also bullet holes in the floor and sofa. Even if he cleaned up the corpses, he would immediately be exposed if the police came looking for him. Not to mention the surveillance cameras that showed only a few people coming up the elevator. The evidence was conclusive. Chapter 252. Rinpoche closed the door and squatted in front of the young man. The young man's mouth was foaming with blood like a crab. His eyes were filled with fear. He did not expect that the person waiting for him was not Jin Jun but another young man. Furthermore, he could feel that his life was slipping away from him. I think you can still be saved. Rinpoche squatted in front of him with a kind face. That's why you have to speak quickly. If you don't speak quickly, there will be no hope. Where is Jin Wen? The young man continued to spit out blood. His neck was like an old hen's for a long time, but he could not say a word. It can't be. Rinpoche was flabbergasted. Where did he hit? He carefully looked at the bleeding spots on the young man's body. One was shot in the lung and the other was near the heart. It was already good enough that the young man was not dead, let alone talking. When he finished looking at the wounds, the young man finally let out a squeak and stopped breathing. Sigh. Actually, I aimed for his stomach. Do you believe me? Rinpoche looked disappointed. He did not care whether the young man could hear him or not. This time he really had to escape. There were still Jin Wen and Jin Wu in the Jin family. He was afraid that they would come for him before tomorrow. He only had 2 choices. One was to wait for them to come and continue to kill them. However, even if he killed them, it would be useless. He could not carry so many corpses away. Furthermore, it would be easy for the police to stop him at home. The other choice was to escape. Rinpoche felt wronged. In a year or 2, the green vine hangover medicine would be on the market. In another 2 or 3 years, the black mud cream and leukemia medicine would also be on the market. At that time he would have money and status. He would be able to reach the pinnacle of his life and win the heart of a rich and beautiful woman. But now all his hopes were dashed. Rinpoche went back to his room to take a shower, change his clothes and gave Chin Ching a call. Then he carried the things that he had just packed and hurriedly went downstairs. As for the corpses, he did not care. This house could not be kept. It was a pity that he had just bought it. 5 people had died consecutively. He did not know if anyone would dare to live in this house in the future. In any case, Renbaqian felt that the feng shui of this house was not very good. Half an hour later, Renbaqian carried a suitcase and appeared at a bank not far away with Chen Qing. He withdrew 1 million yuan in cash and placed it in the suitcase. He then transferred the remaining 20 million yuan to Chen Qing. Because of this, the bank manager interrogated him about the purpose of the transfer, fearing that it was money laundering. "What do you want to do?" Chen Qing frowned and had a look of surprise on his face. Even a fool would know that something was wrong with the situation. "We'll talk after we get out of here," Renbaqian whispered. After settling the matter with the bank manager, Renbaqian and Chen Qing carried their suitcases and left the bank. Renbaqian also took out the luggage that he had previously placed in his car and stuffed it into Chen Qing's car. Then he turned around and said, "I have something to attend to and have to run away. As for the money I just transferred to you, find someone to transfer it to a certain card through other channels. I'll let you know when the time comes." At this moment, Renbaqian had an innocent and helpless look on his face. He looked as miserable as a bully child could be. He was just short of tears and snot. He transferred the money to Chen Qing because he was afraid that if the police froze his bank account, he would be in trouble. Even if it wasn't frozen, the moment he withdrew the money he would be exposed. Now he could only hope that Chen Qing could use other channels to help him launder a sum of money. As for whether Chen Qing would embezzle this sum of money and whether the Qin family would swallow up his shares, there was no need to consider these questions now. So serious? If you offended Jin Jun, it won't be to that extent. I'll think of a way for you. Chen Qing frowned. It's more serious than you think. Renbaqian didn't mention that he had killed someone. In a while, send me the addresses of the few important people in the Jin family, especially the places where they usually go at night. Send it to another phone. Renbaqian left the phone number that he had prepared for the Empress to Chen Qing. In his heart, he was thinking that he would definitely bring the Empress back next time. "You have caused me so much trouble, I have to let you reunite with your family." A famous person once said that the most important thing for a family was to be neat and tidy. When Chen Qing heard Renbaqian's words, he was a little apprehensive and asked, "What are you going to do?" "Just send it to me. Even if you don't know, your father will know. Don't ask about other things first. You will know tomorrow or the day after." After Renbaqian finished speaking, he opened the door of Chen Qing's car and swaggered off. Chen Qing, who was left at the same spot, had a gloomy look on his face. Where should I run to now? Renbaqian pondered. Logically speaking, he should run overseas. No matter what, for lives were still a big case. However, he couldn't go too far now. There were still so many people from the Jin family waiting for him. It was a pity that he didn't have sarin gas with him. Forget it, even if he had it, he wouldn't dare to throw it. Killing people and throwing poisonous gas were two different things. If he dared to throw it, there would be no place in the world where he could hide. Now he only had two choices. He could either run to the mountains or hide in the city. As long as he could hide for 2.5 days, he would be fine. Now almost half a day had passed. There were still 2 days left. If he was optimistic, the Jin family would still need half a day to find his house. That would be 1.5 days. Renbaqian couldn't make up his mind about these two choices. After all, he didn't have much experience in escaping. Just as he was aimlessly driving out of the city, his gaze swept across a shop by the street. He immediately stopped the car by the roadside. It was a musical instrument shop. Aru. Renbaqian's eyes were practically brimming with tears when he saw this shop. If he knew about Aru, would he need to run away? All he had to do was to bring the Empress and annihilate the entire Jin family. This was simply a murder case caused by an Aru. A single slip may cause everlasting sorrow. Looking back, you become a wanted criminal. Renbaqian sighed and got out of the car. He ran into the shop and picked out the Aru for a long time. He even played Laughing in the Pugilistic World, which made the shop owner gasp in amazement. This was the first time he saw someone play Laughing in the Pugilistic World in such a miserable manner. After throwing the Aru into the car, Renbaqian decided to hide in the wilderness. There were too many surveillance cameras in the city, and he didn't have much experience in hiding. He ran to an outdoor shop and bought a big backpack and a light sleeping bag. Then he found a delicatessen and bought 3 caddies of braised beef. Finally, he bought 2 bottles of white wine and 2 loaves of bread. After parking the car in a remote place, Renbaqian stuffed everything into the backpack. He tied the sleeping bag to the backpack and carried the suitcase in one hand and the Aru in the other. He flagged down a car and drove to another remote place. Seeing that it was surrounded by long walls and there didn't seem to be any surveillance cameras, Rinpoche got out of the car and waited for a while. Then he flagged down another taxi and went to Beijing County. After arriving, he changed to another taxi and headed to the old Balding Mountain. This mountain was more than 1,000 meters tall and had a large forest area. It hadn't been developed and was suitable for hiding. He didn't know how much of an impact he would have on the other party's tracking. In any case, he could only try his best to do what he thought of. When he reached the foot of the mountain, it was already dark. Without any delay, he bought a flashlight and climbed the mountain overnight. Panting and crawling for a few hundred meters, Rinpoche truly felt that having too much money could crush someone to death. That box of money and the weight of the suitcase didn't exceed 25 caddies. It was getting heavier and heavier in his hands. There were a few times when he wanted to throw the suitcase away. However, when he thought that he still needed money when he was on the run, he persevered. At this point in time, more than half a day had passed and there were less than 2 days left. At this moment, Chin Ching was sitting in a small shop at the entrance of the neighborhood where Rinpoche lived. He looked at the police cars going in and out of the shop window and remained silent. 2 hours ago he already knew what had happened. Rinpoche had actually killed that Jinjun. Furthermore, he had killed 4 people and drove his own car to escape. No wonder it was as though he was making funeral arrangements today. As for why Jinjun was at Rinpoche's house, he had some guesses but he wasn't sure. I really couldn't tell. Jiang Nan, who was sitting opposite him, was in a daze. She didn't know how to evaluate Rinpoche. She had never expected Rinpoche to do such a thing. It was really unexpected. At this point in time, all the police officers in the city and a large number of hooligans were looking for Rinpoche. Early the next morning, the people at the police station had already obtained some information on Rinpoche's whereabouts. After killing 4 people, that person went to the bank to withdraw money and transferred the rest of the money to someone else. Everyone could understand this. It also showed that this criminal was very dangerous and had a very strong mental fortitude. He was completely unlike an ordinary person. How could an ordinary person calmly make all sorts of arrangements after doing such a thing? However, what he did next made everyone puzzled. That person actually went to a musical instrument shop to buy an eru? And he even played the song Laughing Wanderer? What kind of situation was this? Chapter 253. Rinpoche heard the barking from afar and knew that the police were here. They were fast, much faster than he expected. He didn't know if the police solved the case quickly or if the Jean family was powerful. Even though he didn't make any arrangements, he had changed cars a few times. It would take some time for the police to track his route, right? Rinpoche sat on the rock and pondered. He couldn't just leave like this, right? Even if he were to leave, he had to let them know that he had been here. Thinking of this, he took out a pen and paper from his bag, wrote a note and pressed it on the rock. Then he disappeared before the other party saw him. Half a day later, a team of policemen followed the police dogs to this place and saw a note. The handwriting on the note looked like it was scratched by a chicken's claw. It took them a long time to recognize the words on the note. Comrades, you have worked hard. Everyone flew into a rage after reading the words on the note. Everyone was gnashing their teeth. This murderer was too daring and arrogant. This was simply a provocation. However, the police dogs only circled around this area and couldn't detect any aura anymore. It was as if the person had disappeared from this place. Hundreds of police officers searched the mountain for 5 days, but in the end they couldn't even find a strand of hair. Only that note made everyone gnash their teeth in anger, swearing to arrest this guy and bring him to justice. Sigh. When Rinpoche returned to Pingle Park, he started to sigh again. He threw his things on the ground, took out the eru and played a sad song, Trouble Caused by the Moon. The guards outside looked as if they had seen a ghost. I admit that it's all because of the eru. That kind of night is too beautiful and you are too gentle. After he finished singing, Rinpoche felt the knot in his heart lighten a little. He didn't provoke anyone, but he abandoned his family and business to become a wanted criminal. He even had to hide in the mountain for 2 days. When he was hungry, he ate braised beef. When he was thirsty, he drank erguoto. Could be said that he was miserable. After sighing for a long time, Rinpoche washed his face, changed his clothes and ran to see the Empress. Your Majesty, all the clothes you left at home are gone. Rinpoche sighed when he saw the Empress. The Empress raised her eyebrows. She liked many of those clothes. Furthermore, who dared to touch her things? Even the house is gone. What's the matter? The Empress asked coldly. From her tone, One could tell that she was very unhappy. I was too careless. I didn't think that the other party would stop after attacking me last time and come directly to my house. I had no choice but to kill him. However, I also became a fugitive because of this. Now, I have a home that I can't return to, and I have to hide from place to place. Fortunately, I saw a musical instrument shop on my way to escape. I remembered that I promised Your Majesty to bring back an arrow, so I didn't dare to throw it away even when I was escaping. Fortunately, he had returned safely. However, I'm afraid I'll be hunted down again when I return. Rinpoche looked aggrieved and took out the arrow at the right time. This time around he didn't forget to play it. The Empress's heart softened when she saw his appearance and said, "Forget it, it's good that you are back. I will go with you next time and see what they can do." At present, Rinpoche wasn't in the mood to play Pomp and Circumstance, but he was in the mood to play Second Spring Reflecting the Moon. Fortunately, the Empress didn't mention it and was very considerate of him. After 2 days, Rinpoche's mood was finally better. After all, things had already come to this point and it was useless to sigh. Being a fugitive wasn't a serious matter for Rinpoche now. He could teleport once every 2 to 3 days, and it would take about 10 days for him to appear again. It wouldn't be easy for the other party to catch him. Even if he was caught, as long as he wasn't killed on the spot, he could bring the Empress back and directly break out of prison. However, he couldn't stay in the country anymore and could only go abroad. In fact, it wasn't that there was no other way. For example, he could go to a big country for plastic surgery and change his appearance. However, it was hard to say how the Empress would react when she saw his completely new face. Rinpoche thought about it and decided to continue to escape with this face. On the 3rd day, Rinpoche and the Empress sat in the garden. It was a sunny morning. In the distance, Qing Yuan, Hong Luan, and the 2 imperial guards looked curiously at the strange thing in Rinpoche's hand and kept guessing what he was going to do. The Empress's face was full of anticipation. She also didn't know what an Eru performance would be like. However, when Rinpoche said that he would play it for her, she was full of anticipation and felt a little sweet in her heart. Rinpoche struck a pose with a face full of confidence. He had trained hard to play the Little Wuxian version of Pomp and Circumstance. Then he took a deep breath. When the delicate moans of the Eru came out, the Empress immediately got goosebumps all over her body and her eyes widened. The surrounding imperial guards tensed up and looked as if they had seen a ghost. What was this thing? It gave people the feeling that the arrow in Rinpoche's hand had turned into a spirit. The delicate moans were full of enchantment. If one had to describe it, it would be coquettish. It was simply too coquettish. Rinpoche looked intoxicated. As the music progressed, it finally became a little more normal. However, even the cheerful rhythm at the climax was full of a seductive aura. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, the delicate moans were repeated again. The Empress exerted force and directly grabbed a piece of the stone table in front of her, but she didn't even feel it. She was really shocked. Her face was filled with shock and a little bewilderment. Even when she was facing the 9 pavilions, she didn't have such a huge emotional fluctuation. Her heart, which was usually as calm as a lake, was now like a landslide and a tsunami. She couldn't calm down even for a moment with the sound of the arrow. When the Empress heard the delicate moans, the veins on her forehead started to bulge. Qing Yuan and Hong Luan were already stunned. Both of them looked at Rinpoche with their mouths wide open. Those imperial guards looked as if they were constipated, and their whole bodies were trembling. Before Rinpoche could finish playing the piece that he was so proud of, the stone table had already started to fall piece by piece. The Empress subconsciously used her fingers to scratch the surface of the stone table. Half of the stone table that was half a foot thick had disappeared. Rinpoche only played halfway before abruptly stopping. He had a look of longing on his face. This was because the Little Wuxian version only stopped here. It was said that the neighbor of Little Wuxian smashed the door and barged in. Rinpoche felt that he had never performed so smoothly before. He was so engrossed in his performance today. He opened his eyes and looked at the Empress with a face full of admiration. "At Your Majesty, why are there blue veins on your forehead?" The Empress snatched the arrow and threw it dozens of meters away like a concealed weapon to the imperial guards. She gritted her teeth and said, "Suppress this thing under the plaza in front of the palace." The 2 imperial guards felt as if they had been granted amnesty. Without saying a word, they carried the arrow and dashed out. Chapter 254. Halfway up the mountain it was pitch black. Only the dim moon in the sky shone a little silver light. 2 people were standing there. One of them was squatting in a Slavic posture while the other was standing straight like a javelin. The night wind blew her long hair. "I've asked someone to watch your family. The police are keeping an eye on you. Be more careful. Try not to call home." There were 2 messages. The first one was about Jin Wen and Jin Wu's possible locations at night. The other one was about this. Sigh. Ren Baqin wanted to sigh again. Every time he thought about this, he felt like he was constipated. After a while, Ren Baqin stood up and looked into the distance with a solemn face. "Your Majesty, let's go." Like a chick, the Empress carried him by the back of his neck and leaped into the distance. After leaping for nearly 100 meters, she landed on the ground. The wind blew on Ren Baqin's face. Even though he was being carried by the neck like a chick, Ren Baqin still managed to maintain his solemn face. Feeling the oncoming gale, he was inspired to write a poem and silently recited, "There will be a time when the wind breaks the waves." The last sentence was to hang the sail to save the vast sea. However, Ren Baqin was now the one being held by the Empress, fluttering in the wind. Moving at a speed of 300 miles per hour on the mountain, the Empress leaped more than 10 meters into the air. This was really too exciting. Even though he knew that nothing would happen, Ren Baqin's heart was still racing like an elevator following the Empress's movements. It was 9 o'clock in the evening. With the Empress's speed, she could cover a distance of more than 200 kilometers in an hour. Ren Baqin had a lingering wish. It would be great if the Empress could carry him on her back. It would be much better than being carried like a flag fluttering in the wind. Jin Wen put down the document in his hand, took off his reading glasses and rubbed his temples. "Is there still no news of that kid?" Jin Wen asked. "Yes, Brother Wen," a man in a shirt standing beside him replied. Jin Wen rubbed his temples and picked up another piece of paper. On it was a photo of a young man. This was all of Ren Baqin's information. He had seen it more than once. Up until now, he was still a little surprised that such a person could actually kill his 3rd brother and 3 other subordinates. Also, where did that brat go? It had been half a month. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. It had been so long, but they still couldn't find him. 3rd brother's wife was making a fuss every day, and the people below were also restless. If he really let this kid run away, his face would be thrown into the ditch. "The police are still watching his hometown?" Jin Wen asked. "Yes, but they are about to withdraw," the man said again. "When the time comes, I'll arrange for his family to die a good death. Don't be too quick. Take it slow." "I don't believe that kid won't show up," Jin Wen said casually. Killing someone was difficult, but sometimes it was also very simple. A simple accident was all that mattered. After saying that, Jin Wen took out a box of tea leaves from his drawer and placed it in a covered bowl. The man in the shirt quickly boiled a pot of water, but Jin Wen still made the tea himself. This was his habit. At that moment, the window opposite Jin Wen's room suddenly exploded. Then 2 figures appeared in the room. The sudden change stunned Jin Wen. One had to know that this was the 17th floor. How could someone break the window and come in? However, he didn't slow down. He immediately took out a gun from the drawer and pointed it at the other party. Only then did he carefully identify the 2 figures. One of them was a man. He wasn't very eye-catching, but he looked somewhat familiar. The other was the woman beside him. He couldn't take his eyes off her. "Brother Wen, it's that kid." The man in the shirt cried out in surprise. A little doubt emerged in Jin Wen's mind. That kid. Then he realized who it was. It was the kid with the surname Ren who killed his 3rd brother. After taking a closer look at the 2 of them, he didn't see any ropes on their bodies. This made him a little puzzled as to how they came in. However, a cold smile hung on his face. "Although I have always hoped that you would appear in front of me, I didn't expect it to be like this." As he spoke, he pulled the trigger. 6 gunshots rang out in succession. 4 of them were shot at the woman in red, and the other 2 were shot at Ren Baqin. It couldn't be helped. The appearance of these 2 people was too strange. If he didn't beat them half to death first, he wouldn't be able to rest easy. However, the red-clothed woman's arm seemed to shake, but it also seemed like she didn't move at all. Everything was just an illusion. On the other hand, the 2 of them were still standing there unscathed. Ren Baqin widened his eyes in shock. This old bastard was actually more ruthless than him? Why didn't he say anything and just open fire? Jin Wen was even more shocked than Ren Baqin. He had fired all the bullets in his pistol in one go, but the 2 of them were still unscathed. What the hell? Jin Wen immediately had this thought in his mind, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. The Empress looked calm and collected. With a wave of her palm, more than 10 bullets flew out. The man standing a meter away from Jin Wen was instantly beaten into a sieve. Zixiao, your kung fu is really unparalleled in the world. Ren Baqin gave her a thumbs up. The Empress's face turned even darker and her eyes turned cold. She subconsciously rubbed her fingers and wished she could throw it again. The man's body was covered in blood, and he fell to the ground with a thud. Both of you, we can talk about anything. Jinwen looked panicked. Even though he was used to great storms, he couldn't help but panic in this situation. The other party wasn't even afraid of guns. Who said that this guy was an ordinary person? Ren Baqin saw the panic on Jinwen's face. As he spoke, he took out a magazine from the drawer and reloaded it into his gun. It was as if the gun in his hand gave him a sense of security. Pow! Ren Baqin raised his gun and blood immediately burst out from Jinwen's head. Ren Baqin looked constipated. I was aiming at his shoulder. I haven't finished talking. Is it settled? The Empress turned to look at him with a questioning look. We're still missing Jinwu. He might be on the 17th floor of this building or somewhere else. Ren Baqin looked innocent. He had something to say for a long time, but he didn't even have the chance to say it. After a while, Ren Baqin found Jinwu in a high-end residential area. At that time he was doing something indescribable with a woman. Their loud and resounding screams were heard directly. The Empress had just landed, saw the situation in the house and heard the screams. She felt as if a layer of ice had been scraped off her face. Without saying anything, she struck Jinwu and the woman with her palm. Before they could react, they were stuck to the wall. Ren Baqin looked at the wall full of blood and felt sullen. Why is it so difficult to say something? People say that not returning to one's hometown after becoming rich is like walking at night in brocade clothes. It's the same for revenge. At least let me finish my words. In the end, Ren Baqin had no choice but to find a piece of paper in the room and write his words on it for others to see. It was still written in chicken claw-like handwriting. People say that the most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. Now we're all together. He placed the paper directly on the bed. Ren Baqin's face finally revealed a satisfied look. Next, he searched the room and found Jinwu's son, who was beaten to death by Ren Baqin in the living room. Zixiao, you are blushing. Ren Baqin was carried by the Empress and shuttled between the tall buildings. He turned his head to look at the Empress and said this abruptly. The Empress panicked when she heard this. Her hand trembled and Ren Baqin fell with a blood-curdling scream. Your Majesty, save me. Ren Baqin looked at the ground that was getting closer and closer to him, and his voice turned into a blood-curdling scream. When he was grabbed by the Empress, his heart almost jumped out of his chest. No one would know if they were free-falling from such a high altitude. What's that sound? More than one person in the room heard the blood-curdling scream outside, but there was nothing when they looked out of the window. Ren Baqin lay on the rooftop and gasped for breath. He was really scared just now. If the Empress was a little slower, he would have become a meat patty. The Empress stood at the edge of the rooftop and looked down. She thought of something she saw just now and panicked. Zixiao. I was scared to death just now. Ren Baqin lay on the ground and didn't want to move at all. He was really scared just now. The Empress acted as if she didn't hear what he said. After a long time she finally calmed down. She turned her head and looked at Ren Baqin coldly. Where are we going next? There are still a few places. We are still short of 4 people. Ren Baqin lay on the ground with one hand covering his heart. Point the way. Following which, the two of them went to a few more places and finally completed the mission. Jinwen, Jinwu, and their wives and children were finally reunited. Although it sounded a little cruel, Ren Baqin felt that it would be cruel to himself if he left one of them alive. As for the rest, he didn't need to care about them as they would be in a mess. Late at night, Ren Baqin and the Empress stood on the rooftop of a building. The place opposite them was a very comical place for him. At the city police station. Ren Baqin sat at the edge of the rooftop and took out his phone to make a call. He had just swiped the phone. Hello. The phone rang twice before it was picked up. It was Papa Chin, who sounded very tired. Dad. Ren Baqin said softly. Baqin. Where are you? How are you now? What exactly happened? The police said that you killed someone. Upon hearing Ren Baqin's voice, Papa Chin immediately lowered his voice and asked anxiously. Meanwhile, at the police station of T City and S City. That fellow has appeared. Following a shout and a wave of panic, everyone crowded around the computer. Each and every one of them had a look of surprise on their faces. That bastard had finally appeared. Nowadays, it wasn't as troublesome to use a surveillance van like in the past. They just had to think of a way to plant a virus in the phone. I'm fine, don't worry, Rinpoche said in a relaxed tone. It's good that you are fine. If you are wrongly accused, then turn yourself in. Your mother and I will definitely help you clear your name. Papa Chin hesitated for a while and said in a deep voice. Until now, he still didn't believe that his son would kill someone. In his heart, Rinpoche started his business last year. His conditions were getting better and better, and he even gave a large sum of money to his family. Why would he give up such a bright future and kill someone? I am really wrongly accused. Rinpoche felt wronged. Upon hearing this, Papa Chin immediately felt that his son was indeed wrongly accused. His face revealed a look of surprise. Rinpoche could even hear his mother's panting from the other end of the phone. Don't worry, both of you. I'm fine. I know the rest, and it's not convenient for me to say too much. Just know that I'm doing well. Rinpoche continued to speak in a relaxed tone. Rinpoche spoke to his parents for 2 minutes before hanging up the phone and throwing it on the rooftop behind him. At the opposite police station, a large number of people had already rushed out. A few minutes later, the police rushed up to the rooftop and only saw a phone on the floor. The rest was empty. They searched the entire building for a whole night but still couldn't find any trace of Rinpoche. The phone that Rinpoche used belonged to Jin Jun's son. It was very easy to find him. When the police arrived at Jin Jun's house, they only saw 3 corpses. Following that was Jin Wen Jin Wu, and the note on the bed in Jin Wu's room. People say that the most important thing for a family is to be in order. Now we are all in order. When they saw this note, it was unknown how many people gnashed their teeth in hatred. A total of 11 members of the Jin family were killed in different places in one night. This wasn't just an ordinary murder case. Furthermore, there was a note left behind by the murderer. It was simply showing off and provoking. Vile, simply too vile and insane. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.